Yeah.
But we just
Yeah.
have conference in I think it's Indonesia and Japan, and one of the hosts is the vice chancellor of NUS. Yeah, and
Oh,
he came late, like 15 minutes, because of the internet connection. And everyone said that, oh, Singapore. We thought that Singapore is the fastest internet in the world.
I wonder why that is so,
Yeah.
really, because I don't
There's-
understand.
sometimes, the technology sometimes you have problem with it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
Is,
always.
is it a problem in Indonesia?
No. I mean, problem has always come, but
Yeah. Actually, our experience so far has been it's been okay. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, back and forth between Indonesia, it's not.
well, with the government and also the provider is spending quite a lot of money for the internet, because
Yes.
like school, there is the only way that teacher can provide education for students, because until now Indonesia is officially every school is closed.
Oh, really?
You have to have distance learning.
It's the same thing here in the Philippines
Is
as
it
well.
all
Yeah.
throughout the whole country or just in
The whole country. Officially, it's the whole country. Well, the Minister of Education said that if you are in the green zone, you have the choice of opening the school. But if the parents say that, oh, my children is not safe to go school, then it's the parent choice, and the school has to provide the distant learning for the students. So officially, yes, everyone has to provide distant learning for the students.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
It's very hard for the very remote location, but
Yeah. So what if they don't have computers? They use their phones.
well, sometimes one phone for 3 children or something, and like dad's phone, the the phone for the parents, because the parents sometimes work, and the student can like just access the internet later on in the night or something. It's very difficult.
Oh,
Right.
wow.
Yeah.
So they can actually just record it, and then the children can study it.
Yeah, and that's the other option. And some of the teachers, because of the some of the teachers actually go home by home, door by door, to provide the
Right.
yeah.
That's happening in the Philippines also.
Okay. Yeah.
Where the teachers will then go to the kid. Well, I mean, virtually go to the kid's house and help them with the day's studies. Yeah, it's becoming a really big industry here, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's you mean like tuition?
Basically like tuition. Although I think some of the teachers, what they do is they're going into their students. I mean, their regular students. They're communicating with the regular students, and I don't think they're charging any money for that. But it's kind of above and beyond kind of situation to give them extra help. So it's been a very interesting experience here. Here in the Philippines, but.
It is.
Yeah, but what I find really interesting about it is really kind of the bottom-up solutions, rather than the top-down solutions. We're getting a lot of bottom-up solutions here. That okay, it's not great, but it's still working. Yeah. So I mean, but I think everybody hopes that we get back to old normal again. But we'll see about that. I'm not so sure.
Hopefully the vaccine comes out soon, internationally, globally.
Before November 4th.
Oh, well, we are close to the starting time, but we're still waiting for more people to come and join. Yes, Pasidat is already on, and Vanita will just promote him to be panelist. We're now live on YouTube, and we already see that we have about 71 participants. So welcome everyone. Good evening, selamat sore, selamat malam. And here's Dr. Siddharth.
Bella, should we be muting?
Not necessary.
Okay.
Good morning, Siddharth.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good evening, everybody.
Yeah, good morning, Pak Siddharth.
Selamat pagi. Apa kabar, Bu Poppy?
Baik. Sudah lama
Thank you
tidak
for joining. I know it's early where you are also.
Ya.
masih gelap, still dark outside.
Yes.
Ya.
Okay, so we have everybody here. Thank you very much. Terima kasih sekali Pak Profesor Ismunandar, Ibu Profesor Popi Rufaidah dari Embassy of Indonesia in the United States, Professor Siddharth Chandra, and it's a pleasure to also welcome our speakers for the workshops, for the entire workshop, Paul Nerney and Susan Nerney, as well as Paul Kratoska. So, selamat sore Bapak dan Ibu di Indonesia. Good evening, dan selamat pagi tentunya buat kita di Eastern Time Zone di United States. Selamat datang di acara kita AIFIS-RISTEK BRIN Academic Writing Workshop yang akan berlangsung dari tanggal 2 sampai 18 November 2020. It is a pleasure to welcome all of you, Bapak dan Ibu, this evening waktu Indonesia Barat and in the morning Eastern Time in the United States. Saya adalah Neta Anggia, saya Direktur Eksekutif dari American Institute for Indonesian Studies or AIFIS. Saya berada di kantor AIFIS di Ithaca, New York. Saya mengucapkan salam hangat dan selamat datang. AIFIS has been organizing these academic writing workshops for the past 3 years now with generous support of the Henry Luce Foundation and also support from our partners for the past 3 years, Universitas Indonesia, Universitas Gadjah Mada, Universitas Atmajaya. This year, we are honored to organize the workshop in partnership and collaboration with the Indonesian Ministry of Research and Technology, National Agency for Research and Innovation, or Kementerian Riset dan Teknologi, Badan Riset dan Inovasi Nasional of the Republic of Indonesia. I would like to welcome and introduce our distinguished guest who will be saying a few words for this opening session. I would like to welcome Bapak Profesor Dr. Ismunandar, Senior Advisor to the Minister for Relevance and Productivity of the Ministry of Research and Technology of Indonesia. Thank you also to Ibu Professor Dr. Popi Rufaidah for joining us incredibly early in the morning, your time in the United States. We would also like to welcome Ibu Popi is the Attaché of Education and Culture of the Embassy of Indonesia in the United States. And also welcome to Professor Dr. Heri Hermansyah, Direktur Pengelolaan Kekayaan Intelektual Ristek BRIN, dan Bapak Hanif Arif, Kasubdit Fasilitasi Publikasi Ilmiah Ristek BRIN. We would like to also welcome Professor Siddharth Chandra, President of AIFIS, Director of the Asian Studies Center, Professor of Economics at James Madison College of the Michigan State University, and Professor by courtesy at the Department of Epidemiology of Biostatistics, Michigan State University. The workshop will begin with opening remarks from our very distinguished guest today, and then will be followed by the first lecture sessions by our speaker, Dr. Paul Kratoska, with Dr. Yosef Jakababa, AIFIS Indonesia Country Representative, as moderator for today's lecture sessions. Without further ado, I would like to invite Bapak Profesor Ismunandar dari Kementerian Ristek dan Teknologi untuk kindly Pak deliver your opening remarks. Silakan Pak Ismunandar, terima kasih.
Terima kasih Mbak Neta. Selamat malam Bapak Ibu sekalian di Indonesia. Selamat pagi Bu Popi, Pak Sidat, Mbak Neta, Mbak Bella. Ada Pak Paul, tapi Pak Paul ini ada di Manila, jadi selamat malam juga. Pak Paul satu lagi masih trying to joining again ya Mbak Neta ya. He's trying to sign off and fix the connection. Pak Paul, Pak Kratoska itu joining dari Singapura, dan Pak Yosef, Pak Johan, dan kawan-kawan dari AIFIS juga. It's a great pleasure for us to work again with AIFIS. When we were in Ristek Dikti, I also visited the workshop in Atmajaya. It was intense workshop for during some session, it's about 100 more participants, but in the intensive session, I believe it's about 20 to 30 participants, Pak Sidat, yeah, at that time. And when I start to serve and help Pak Minister Ristek, so we have a discussion with Pak Sidat. So the pandemic is in one way give us also blessing. Yeah? So with the pandemics, this kind of workshop can be benefit larger audience, because if we have face-to-face, or in Indonesia we call outside internet, or outside the online. So yeah, it is a small number of participants can join, but this workshop, because we also do the streamline in YouTube, and it can be benefit for more people. So we do hope that the workshops is benefiting many educators, many lecturers in Indonesia, and also researchers. But again, this workshop also contain the intensive for like intense tutoring or intense shadowing between the researchers, and also the one that has a manuscript that ready to be published. And I do hope that out of the intense workshop, the paper is ready for submission in prestigious journals. I want to also mention here that during the last 4 or 5 years, the Ministry of Riset Dikti at that time has encouraged all the scholars in Indonesia, lecturers and researchers in Indonesia to publish in internationally recognized journal, to be also as a media for communication. Yeah, so the research can be read, can be solved by other people and other researchers. So the collaboration and communication can be out of the research. So in the last 4 years, and the result of the encouragement from the ministry throughout several programs, it's been quite successful. It is shown by about 400% increase in terms of quantity. Yeah? The quantity of publication of Indonesian researchers is 4 times larger than the 2015 publication number. But we now in the position that it is the quantity is we need still encourage the more people publishing, the more publication. We encourage more publication, but at the same times we also encourage the publication in more prestigious journals. So toward during the last 4 or 5 years, many publication is still like in proceedings. We encourage to shift toward journals. The one that is already in journal, we encourage them to try to publish in more prestigious journals, in more higher quartile, what we is also the jargon now. So in quartile 1, quartile 2, if you've been publishing in quartile 3 journal, you're trying to improve the quality. That's I think the encouragement from the ministry, and we believe that this kind of activities will facilitate this improving in the quantity, and in the same time also improving the quality. So with that, again, I thanks AIFIS, Pak Sidat and Bu Neta, and also the AIFIS in Indonesia, and also thanks all the facilitators, the speakers for the workshop, and also for the shadowing during the manuscript preparation. Thank you so much, Mbak Neta. Mbak Neta, you still mute, Mbak.
Mbak Neta suaranya masih mute.
Yes, I'm very sorry. Thank you very much again, Bapak Professor Dr. Ismunandar. And I would now like to invite Ibu Professor Dr. Poppy Rufaida, Attaché of Education and Culture of the Embassy of Indonesia in the United States, to kindly deliver your opening remarks. Ibu, silakan, and thank you.
Bisa buka screen-nya ya, Mbak Neta? Bisa share
Baik, Bu.
screen? Ya.
Bisa, Bu.
Ya, terima kasih. Ya, terima kasih. Terima kasih kepada AIFIS dan juga Kementerian Riset dan Teknologi dari Badan Riset Inovasi Nasional. Good writing skill are one of the requirement for the writer to publish in reputable journal, as mentioned by Professor Ismunandar from Ministry of Research and Technology. And we all know that skill to publish in a peer-reviewed journal, it is a must for mostly academics. So I would like to raise an interesting issue published by Forbes magazine recently regarding things that maybe we need to consider mostly for academics. Ini sudah muncul ya Mbak Neta ya, sebentar nih kok enggak.
Sudah muncul, Bu?
Yeah, so it is very interesting. Forbes magazine raised the issue about the survey. They asked to the CEO about the possibility of the companies to open during the pandemic and also in near future. And then nearly 54% they mentioned that slightly less the probability of the firm to open. And then if we see the probability also for the company to lay off of the employee are nearly approaching to 10%. And then it is also related with the books. Yeah, it is also interesting. In the beginning of January 2020, there is a book written by Daniel Susskind. He declared that machines are getting so smart. That's why he wrote a book about a world without work. And it happened when coronavirus pandemic happened in China in December 2019, and then in the US it happens approaching become a pandemic in March 2020. And then based on the prediction of Daniel Susskind mentioned that there is a growing list of jobs potentially will be replaced by the technology automatization. And let me see the data in the US. Number of unemployment rate approaching increasing, yeah, time to time. And then based on the survey done by McKinsey also showing in 5 states, Hawaii, Kentucky, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, number of unemployment also are increased. The largest number are happen in California, New York, and in Texas, and also in Florida. And we see the vulnerable job by industry, and also we see a number of jobs that disappear in based on the industry. The largest in the accommodation and food services, retail trade, healthcare and social assistance, administrative and support, and etc. You see in this number, the number of job are disappear due to COVID-19. And then based on the survey also show that nearly 50 million jobs are in vulnerability. And then the job category that are facing the decrease number of job availability also increased by sector. And across sample of 8 representative states that the pandemic hit the leisure and hospitality sector are the hardest. So we can see here from the data, this industry showing a very hard in the situation where the number of unemployment are increased. What is the relationship this situation with the event that we are going to attend, the workshop for academic writing? We have to see that also this is the latest data based on the survey mentioned that top 50 occupation by absolute decrease in job posting are on the right side, and then 15 occupation by absolute increase in job posting are in the left side. So while the COVID pandemic also pushed the industry to close their operation, but on the other hand also there are certain jobs that are available, such as interpreter and translator, respiratory therapist, mostly in the health industry. We can see like registered nurse, internist, psychiatric, and etc. And based on the survey in Europe, there are 51 million jobs at risk from automatization, and then 24 million jobs at risk of displacement from both automatization and COVID-19. So job risk at risk for displacement of the technology also happens in nearly the sector that are also happening in the US. So there are similarity what happened in the US and the Europe. So it also happened also in Japan. Yeah, more than half of work time in Japan is spent on repetitive activities, 2/3 of which can be automated. So we can see like processing data, collecting data, predictable physical work, and etc. It's become obvious due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And there is the new publication mentioned that this is the challenges for the education or in higher education, how the education industry could forecast share of job that can be done at home, and then how the industry could adopt it with this situation, like computer and mathematical occupation, education training, legal occupation, business, and etc. This is the list of share of job that can be done at home. And then in the next slide also providing the information about list of job that can be done at home. And this also list of share of job that can be done at home by industry. So educational services providing one of the highest opportunity for providing job opportunity during pandemic. Due to this situation, U.S. higher education institution now facing a shortfall and also causing to their budget in managing the university. And then also the university now providing nearly online learning and also operating not only during this fall semester, but predicted in the next spring semester in 2021. The question here, due to the job availability is decreased, the opportunity for the graduate is very obvious. Do they have a job to be applied for them? Do universities only providing the certificate for the student? It is very interesting. So this is also those kind of issue that happening could become part of the topic that can be researched and then maybe published, and then to find out how the solution for this situation. And challenges of the publication during COVID-19 pandemic has been raised by a certain institution like the International Society for Medical Publication Professional that mentioned the author responsiveness due to COVID-19 should be considered, and the European Association of Science Editor also encouraged the report research during COVID-19 could meet required standard, and European Network Research Integrity also mentioned that this is due to the critical situation could not decrease the quality of the publication. And lastly, the Society for Scholarship Publishing mentioning that new ways to publish in peer-reviewed journal and in academic peer review research and entire academic publishing ecosystem should be maintained in a high quality standard. Okay, I think this is the issue that we would like to raise in this session. Good luck to all participants for attending a very good workshop for academic writing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ibu Professor Dr. Poppy Rufaida. I would now like to invite Professor Sida Chandra to deliver your remarks. Please, Professor Chandra, and thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Neta. It's my pleasure to be here at the opening of this workshop. As Ibu Neta mentioned, I'm president of the American Institute for Indonesian Studies. And before I say a little bit about the Institute, I would like to express on behalf of all of AIFIS, our members, our member individual and institutional members, our deep gratitude to Bapak Professor Ismunandar from RISTEK BRIN for providing the opportunity to collaborate with the ministry. I think Pak Ismunandar as Director General, the role that you play is critical to the development of higher education in Indonesia and also enhancing the research capabilities of our Indonesian colleagues. Also to your team, Bapak Heri Hermansyah and Pak Hanif Arif and your other colleagues with whom we've worked in the lead up to this workshop. I would also like to thank very much Ibu Poppy, Professor Poppy Rufaida, the Attaché of Education and Culture in the Indonesian Embassy in Washington, D.C., for your ongoing support. Ever since you've come to the US, you've been very supportive of AIFIS's activities and collaborations with our friends and friendly institutions in Indonesia. So thank you very much. I'd just like to say a few words. I know that everybody's here for the workshop, so I don't want to come in the way of that. But by way of a little bit of background, the American Institute for Indonesian Studies is a consortium of over 30 US universities, most of them research universities that have faculty members who are very interested in doing research on Indonesia. As a result, one of the things we would like to do is expand our relationships with colleagues in Indonesian institutions to work with you, to do research with you, to write papers with you, to get them published in international journals with you, but also to facilitate a greater entry of Indonesian voices into the different disciplines that our different faculty members represent. And we represent disciplines from all the way from the humanities, from literature and culture and language, to the social sciences, from anthropology and sociology to politics and economics, all the way to the applied sciences, including the environmental sciences and agriculture. So I would like to make this invitation to everybody on behalf of the members of AIFIS. We want to partner with you. Please get in touch with us. Now you know who we are and where we are. We will do whatever we can to help link you with colleagues in the United States with whom you can co-author articles or write books or do research. I'd just like to say a couple of other things. We are in the planning stages now at the American Institute for Indonesian Studies for two things that might be of interest to our colleagues in Indonesia. The first is we are thinking about holding a conference. We have not yet determined the dates, but that conference is going to be a virtual conference. And as Bapa Professor Ismunandar was saying, I think we have realized, we should have realized it without COVID-19 happening, but we've realized after COVID that there is a lot that we can accomplish over the internet. And the idea for this conference is to bring together Indonesian and American scholars in the area of Indonesian studies without having to fly and bear the burden of the expensive airfares and hotels and so on. So at a relatively low cost and instantaneously to bring together colleagues from Indonesia and the United States. And the second thing that is in the planning stages, when the American Institute for Indonesian Studies was founded, the idea was for American universities to be members of the Institute. But now that we have developed relationships with so many of you, with your colleagues in Indonesia, we are thinking of developing a new membership category in which we will invite Indonesian universities and Indonesian scholars to join AIFIS as well. And we hope very much that you will be interested in doing it, that it will open the doorway to future collaborations and co-publication. So with that, thank you so much for coming. Selamat malam, selamat pagi to the few of you who are in the United States. And I'll hand it back over to Ibu Neta Anggia.
Thank you very much, Bapak Professor Siddharth Chandra. And we would like to thank all of our distinguished guests once again for their time and their important opening remarks. We are now at the start of the first lecture sessions on two topics: writing for publication and what journal editors look for, and current trends in academic publishing. But before we begin with the first lecture sessions, I'd like to briefly introduce our three speakers, facilitators for all of the public lecture sections of this workshop. Dr. Paul Kratoska is Publishing Director and formerly Director of NUS, National University of Singapore, Press at the National University of Singapore. He served on the board of directors of the US-Association for Asian Studies from 2003 to 2005 and is past editor of the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies and the current editor of the Journal of the Malaysian branch of the Royal Asiatic Society. Susan Lopez Nerney designed, coordinated, and taught language, writing, and professional communication courses for undergrads and graduates in the Center for English Language Communication at the National University of Singapore from 1992 until 2013. She has conducted writing workshops for graduate degree candidates and junior faculty in Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, the Philippines, and of course, Indonesia. She is a mentor for the US Social Science Research Council's Global Scholars Initiative. Paul Nerney designed, taught, and coordinated courses in English as a second language and English as a first school language for the Center for English Language. He also worked under the Provost's office to design, teach, and coordinate writing and critical thinking modules for the University Scholars Program and University Town Residential Program. More recently, he has conducted writing workshops for graduate degree candidates and junior faculty in Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, the Philippines, Hong Kong, and Indonesia. He is also a mentor for the US Social Science Research Council's Global Scholars Initiative. Now, before we begin our session, I'd like to remind everyone to please use the Q&A function to ask questions. Mohon mempergunakan fungsi Q&A untuk bertanya. Kolom chat akan kami disable, jadi kalau ingin bertanya silakan mempergunakan Q&A. For those of you who are viewing the workshop through the live streams on Facebook and YouTube, please put your questions in the comment sections. Silakan menulis pertanyaan di komen di Facebook dan YouTube. Please also note that the entire workshop sessions will be recorded, and we would like to kindly ask that you put your names to be the display names of your Zoom account, sehingga kami bisa membacakan nama Anda bila pertanyaan Anda terpilih untuk ditanyakan di forum ini. Baiklah, without further ado, I'd like to let my colleague and our session moderator, Dr. Yosef Jagababa, to lead the first lecture sessions for today. Bapak Dr. Yosef Jakababa, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Neta, for the opportunity. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, all the mentors and Pak Ismunanda, Bu Poppy, and everyone who's here logging in through Zoom and also through our live YouTube streaming and I believe also Facebook. Today, our first session for the lecture will be Dr. Paul Kratoska. Net already introduced Dr. Kratoska's distinguished background, and his topic for today is the first one would be the writing for publication, what journal editors look for, and then later on he'll be covering on the current trends in academic publishing. But I believe tonight he will also cover about issues and trends in scholarly communications. So as a reminder again, after each of the session, there will be like 5 to 6 minute breaks. But I think for those of you who are attending, you can ask again using the Q&A feature, and please put your name so we can address your question later during the Q&A. Without further ado, please, Paul Kratoska, the floor is yours, and you may begin the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, good evening. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm starting off here with 3 sections. I'm going to begin by talking about what journal editors look for. Then I'm going to talk about writing for academic publication. And the idea of this is to help you with your own writing meet the expectations of journal editors. And then the third part is about getting published. So we begin with this, what journal editors look for. So the first question, the fundamental question really is, what do editors want? And my guess is if I asked people in this audience, everyone would get this a little bit wrong. Because the basic thing editors want is readers. There's really no point in publishing something if no one's going to read it. And what that also tells you as a writer is that you need to be thinking about who is going to read what you're doing, what is your audience. Oftentimes editorial discussions begin with the question, who is going to read this? Sometimes they don't go any further, because if we decide there is not really enough of a readership, we may well just reject a manuscript right away. So authors really need to write something that people will read. So the next obvious question is, okay, if we're looking for readers, what do readers want? And I think fundamentally you could answer that by saying readers are looking for answers to questions. Now, everybody in any field will know certain things, and there are certain things they don't know. So everybody obviously has questions. And research always starts with a set of questions about facts. Anybody doing research is going to have to answer questions about who, what, when, and where. But that doesn't really take you very far. You really need to go on from there and ask questions of why and how. Answers to these questions are arguments. And the best articles you're going to get are generally articles that are built around an argument. So good papers begin with interesting questions, and they're built around arguments. So when we evaluate a manuscript, when a manuscript arrives, there's an editorial review. And the purpose of this review is basically to decide whether we're going to continue, whether we're going to proceed with this manuscript or not. So the first question is, does the journal deal with the topic? As an author, what you need to be doing is checking a journal's guidelines before you submit an article. When I was doing the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies, we occasionally got articles about Bangladesh. And we didn't count Bangladesh as a Southeast Asian country. And we said this in the journal and on the web page. So anybody who sent an article on Bangladesh was going to get rejected immediately. Secondly, is the topic significant? Well, how does anybody know that? The editor of a journal will have some idea of what's significant in the field, but part of what you need to do as an author is to explain why it's significant. And to do that, you can use the abstract, you can use the opening paragraph, and you put something in there. And it's not enough just to say, oh, this is very important. Everybody thinks their own work is important. So what you're really looking to do is explain why it's important. Third thing we look for, is there an argument? Now, the argument is the answer to a research question, but actually any statement can be an argument. And as I said earlier, the most interesting arguments answer a question about why or how something happened. And then finally, we want to think about who's going to read this. And every journal editor has an understanding of the audience for the journal and what kind of articles appeal to those readers. So again, if you look at what a journal publishes, if you look at what it says that they want to publish, you can make a better selection of where to send your material. So where do we look to find answers to these questions? Fundamentally, we're not going to read every sentence or probably every page or every paragraph. We're going to focus on the title, the abstract, the keywords, the introduction, and the conclusion. So you should pay attention to those features of your paper and use them to explain your argument and basically indicate to an editor why the paper should be published. Now, there are two possible outcomes after this preliminary screening. The first one is called a desk rejection. And a desk rejection happens when the journal editor decides not to send an article for peer review. When the editor decides this article really has no chance of getting accepted. And the second option is that we do send it for peer review. And of course, that's what you're hoping for. Because once you get past this initial screening, then whether you're published or not is going to depend on the quality of your information. With international refereed journals, there will be at least 2 reviews, and usually these are what's called double blind. What that means is the reviewer doesn't know the identity of the author doesn't know the identity of the reviewer. The reviewers that we pick are subject experts. Both the journals that I've worked on, when I send an article out for review, we pick the most important figure in the field that will accept. And a lot of senior scholars do accept this. So we want them to look at the data. We want them to look at the argument. We want them to look at the conclusions. In other words, the content. Up until this point, as a referee, as an editor, I generally am not looking very hard at the content. I'm looking at the structure. I'm looking whether you have an argument, whether the data seems reasonable, what the conclusions are. And the reason for that is that, let me just give an example. I am a specialist on Southeast Asian history, and I've done work on the Japanese occupation of Malaya. I've done work on the rice industry in Southeast Asia. I don't think I should, as an editor, evaluate papers on those topics. So what I will do is send them off to an external peer reviewer. Now, the peer review process for English language journals tends to be adversarial. In other words, the reviewer is going to attack the article. The idea is you test for weaknesses, you challenge the arguments, and if you find them, then you call attention to them, and the author can then try to address these problems. They can fix the weaknesses, they can improve the arguments. Now, the goal here is twofold. If a paper is really weak, then the referee is going to recommend that it be rejected. On the other hand, if the referee sees value in a paper, the referee will probably suggest ways that it could be improved. What kind of questions do we ask reviewers? Well, these are questions that I've asked, and also there are online submission systems, which I'll talk about later. But this is the kind of questions that are also featured in those submission systems. So first of all, is it a good topic? Is it really worthy of being investigated? Secondly, about the contribution the paper makes. So does it change what was previously known? Has the author supported the argument? Are the sources complete? Are they appropriate? And did the referee find any serious mistakes, errors? We ask about the writing. Is it easily understood? And if it's not, is this something that can be fixed? We ask for recommendations. Doesn't mean we're necessarily going to follow them. So I'm going to do a quick Q&A here about the peer review process. First question, are all manuscripts sent to referees? And the answer to that is no. Well, why don't we send them all to referees? Well, of course, some of them we decide just aren't worth thinking very hard about. They're just, for some reason, a piece we're not going to be very interested in pursuing. But beyond that, major journals are receiving very large numbers of manuscripts. So the Journal of Asian Studies a few years ago was getting about 300 submissions per year. Out of those submissions, they were probably going to pick 25. Every submission that is seriously considered will be sent to 2 referees. So if they refereed everything, they would have to find 600 people to conduct the refereeing. And most of them would be wasting their time. So what a journal will do if they're receiving that many submissions is do a preliminary cut. And they will probably send out, if they're going to accept 25, they may send 50 or 75 to be refereed. The rest of them, they will say no. So there are too many manuscripts, too few reviewers, and too little space in the journals, because no journal can publish 300 manuscripts in a year. There is a slight exception, which I'll talk about later. Who gets asked to do peer review? Generally established scholars. For books at NUS Press, we always wanted to get people who had published at least one book of their own. And for journal articles, generally speaking, it will be somebody who has a publishing record. So people sometimes ask, does this create a bias? Do people who are doing the reviews simply want to defend what they've done in the past? Well, generally speaking, in my experience, reviewers support new ideas, even sometimes if they disagree with those ideas. They want the younger scholars especially to get their ideas out and considered by other scholars. Are reviewers paid? In most cases, for most journals, the answer is no. And this creates a bit of a problem because we, as journal editors, have no leverage over the reviewers. So when the reviewer decides, well, I'm sure I want to do this, and then a month goes by and we don't get a report, all we can do is drop them a note and say, well, you said you would do this. Could you get on to doing it? And reviewers usually are conscientious, but they're busy. So they set something aside, they think, okay, I'll read this later, and then they forget about it. What goes into a good peer review report? And by this, I don't mean a positive report. I mean one that really does a good job. Well, the answer, to put it simply, is when the reviewer engages with the ideas in the paper. Sometimes we get reports from people and you know that person thought the author should have written a different paper. And so they spend all their time talking about the paper they think the author should have written instead of the one that the author actually did write. Those are useless from the standpoint of an editor. And when someone does that, we just have to go and get another report. Well, what happens when referees disagree? Well, this is also a very common question, and referees really do often disagree. So there are a couple of choices. An editor might go out and get another review. But sometimes when you look at two referees' reports, one is very convincing. The other one, it doesn't look like the referee took the piece very seriously. And sometimes an editor will simply say, well, the one report is so convincing that I plan to use that one, and I will accept or reject on the basis of that report. Do editors have to follow the recommendations made by the referees? Well, again, the answer here is no. We take this as a piece of advice, but the editor is the one making the decision, not the referee. People also ask me, are double-blind reviews really anonymous? And in fact, reviewers often do figure out who the author of a paper was, especially when the field is fairly small. One very prominent Thai specialist often did reviews for me in the past. Every single time, he took great delight in saying, I figured out, I know who wrote this. Well, he was in Thai studies. Thai studies is not a large field, and this man was really probably the most prominent figure. And I think almost everyone doing research in that field were people that he knew or knew about. So I'm not surprised that he figured it out. He was also very, very fair. So it didn't really matter. And in fact, I recently did a report for a journal, and a major US journal, and immediately they told me the identity of the author. So I wrote them and I said, well, why did you do that? And they said, well, we've decided that normally people can figure this out. So it there doesn't seem to be any point in trying to keep this secret. Okay, there's a lot of criticism of the peer review process. And so the question is obvious. Is there a better way to select what gets published? And I suppose there might be. But generally, the conclusion is peer review seems to be what you might call the least bad way of making a decision. It's not going to be fail-safe. Some good articles will be rejected. Some not so good articles will be published. But on the whole, over the years, I felt like the ones that I rejected probably either deserved to be rejected or they were going to get published somewhere else. And that peer review really helped me with the screening. Anyway, what are the alternatives? Well, there are various suggestions, and some journals are trying them out. You could have open peer review. So the name of the peer reviewer and the name of the author, very visible. And everything is publicly available. You could have a limited peer review. There are a few big mega journals. They will publish anything if the methodology is right, is correct, is acceptable. They don't review the content, but they say, okay, we'll check the methodology, and then we will leave it up to the public to decide whether the content is any good. And a more extreme version of that is having no peer review. Simply put the articles out and let readers decide if they have any value or not. So how are decisions about publishing made? Well, partly they are based on the peer review, but there are a number of other considerations for a journal editor. First is, how many articles are already on hand and accepted for future issues? Sometimes there are a lot, and in that case, an editor will be more strict. What is the significance of this particular article compared with other submissions? Well, this is hard to judge because every article is unique. If you go to the store and you're buying apples, you can say, well, this apple looks better than that one, but they're both apples. With articles, each one is different. Each one has a different writer, a different research process. And so if you're talking about comparing two articles, there's no really clear way of doing it. Often you look at the peer review and what the reviewer says about the contribution, the significance of the piece. has the topic been covered recently? That can actually work in two ways. Sometimes if a journal has done a special issue on a topic, they may not want to have any more articles for the time being. On the other hand, if they have published a series of articles on the same topic, they may welcome another one. So when I was doing the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies, one author wrote to me and said, well, I have a paper. And I realized quite a few of the sources I used came from the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies. So I thought you might be interested. And yes, we were. And yes, we did publish that piece. So journals usually will have some themes that they cover fairly regularly. And if you see that, then it's a good choice to go to that journal, especially if there's an ongoing discussion of a particular topic. Another consideration is how much editorial work would be required. Now, most journals are not able to do a lot of copy editing. Copy editing meaning correcting the grammar, correcting mistakes in language, making sure that the sentences are really acceptable. Some journals will do it to a limited extent, but it depends very much on how much of that is required. So sometimes you get a decision that is revise and resubmit. And sometimes people look at that and feel like they've been rejected. Again, going to the Journal of Asian Studies, the person who was handling that for a number of years said she was always surprised. They would send a revise and resubmit letter, and people would not follow up. Now, they'd submitted an article. Obviously, they did want to publish in that journal. So the question is, why didn't they follow up? And often it's simply they felt like, well, it's a rejection. It is a good outcome. So let me give you an example. One major journal in North America is the American Political Science Review. In 2017, 2018, they received more than 1,200 submissions. 34% of those submissions were immediately sent back to the authors for what they called technical reasons. So that left 814 manuscripts. 40% of those were given a desk rejection, that is no referee's report. 51% were rejected after peer review. And 9% were invited to revise and resubmit. None of them, that's 0, were accepted without revisions. So if you get a revise and resubmit, it means the journal is interested. It means they're willing to work with you, and you should not pass up the opportunity. Okay, now I'm dividing this into 3 parts, followed by a 4th discussion about scholarly publishing. So this ends the first part. And with that, I'll give you all about a 5-minute break.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for the first part of the presentation. Now we're having a 5-minute break. And Paul, let me ask, would you like to have all the questions at the end or like between session?
Well, how many questions do you have?
We have currently 3 questions. After the break, we can go
I think
over
we
if
can.
you want.
Well, let's go ahead after the break. And
Okay.
are people hearing right now or no? Is the audience
Yes.
hearing?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Why don't you tell me what the questions are, and I might be able to work it into the next section.
Okay. All right. Let me read it to you. The first question is from Siti Daroja, Admiral Husbandry Fakultas Universitas Pajajaran. We have a problem about article connected with our level of research where which were far from advanced research and far from novelties research because of our equipment still simple. So it affects the quality of our article. could you please give me advice? How can we make a good article because of lack of the equipment? She's from animal husbandry faculty, Pajajaran.
Okay,
So
well, that I will be bringing up in the next section about writing. So
okay.
We'll cover that one.
All right. Actually, we have two questions at 3. Hi, Mr. Kratoska. I would like to ask about references on the manuscript. How if I cited a predator journal as references unpurposedly? Would it become an editor consideration? Thank you. Oh, we have a couple of more. And that was from Cindy Clara. And then there's one from Arini Utami. I wonder if Dr. Paul Kratoska can share some tips on how to make our manuscript unique and quote unquote be seen by editors. Thank you, Arini from University of Gajah Mada. And then Professor Pujati, what factors for the articles are rejected in Scopus index publication? So
say that again, please.
She would like to know what are the factors for an article to be rejected in a Scopus index publications journal.
Okay, well, it's the same as any other journal. So, okay.
And then Sefira Yanadi from Surabaya. Thank you for such wonderful questions. I'm wondering if you have a special tips to elaborate our journal in such a well-organized way. I think you will talk about that later. What characters can be seen in international accepted journal? Okay, this is part of the whole presentation. Ahmad Solihin, good afternoon, Professor Paul, and thank you, AIFIS. Could you tell how significant novelties during editorial and reviewing processes within manuscript decision?
It's how significant what?
Novelties.
Novelties.
Novelties during editorial and reviewing processes within manuscript decision. Those are the questions that we listed in Q&A. I'm still waiting for the. Okay, hold on. Is there anything from the YouTube? Okay, hold on. From YouTube, I have to look for a different. Absent list. Okay, what does it mean?
Well, why don't we proceed with the second part? We can pick those up
later.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so let me just share the next one.
I think we can begin. I think the second part.
Okay, so this is about writing for publication. And some of the questions that were raised, I think I'll cover in this section. So you begin by doing research. And research, as I said earlier, begins with questions. Writing, though, has to begin with answers. Your research project is very undoubtedly, I think, confusing and disorderly because research just works that way. You go after pieces of information, you don't find the information or it isn't what you expected. You have to change your questions. All that is in the background. But when you write, you have to have it clear and orderly. And how do you do that? Well, good writing requires planning. And by that, I don't mean trying to put together a complete outline. What you want to consider, though, before you start your writing is several points. First of all, as I said earlier, you need an audience. So you want to think about who you expect will read your paper. You need to think about why they would be interested in your paper. Then you need to think about and probably write down the main question that you are answering. Now, I mean, you answer lots of questions in any paper, but every paper should be built around the answer to one main question. And you have to start thinking about that. And think about what your answer to that is. how you're going to support that answer, and how you will organize your paper. And I mean, there aren't too many choices for organization. Sometimes papers are done chronologically, sometimes they're done topically. The thing is, you don't want to get locked into your plan. You can change this while you write. But if you try and write without a plan, it just is very, very difficult. Sometimes you feel like, okay, I understand this material and I can just start talking about it. But generally that just leaves you floundering around because you have no direction, and you need a sense of direction. You need an idea of, okay, if I say this, what's the next thing I say? Where does it go from here? So successful papers are built around that. There's a core, and the core is the argument. So research starts with these facts: the who, the what, the when, and the where, and then it's followed by the analysis, the why and the how. So the answer to any question is a claim. If I tell you, I got up at 7 o'clock this morning, well, that's a claim. And do you want to test it? Do you want to check into it? Well, you probably don't want to, but you could. But it's not a very important claim. So what you want is some kind of a point that's significant, some kind of point that people are going to want to find out about. So strong papers generally answer analytical questions. And so when creating an argument, review your factual material. Try to figure out what piece of information you have that will lead to a good question. So let me just give you a simple example. You see somebody wearing a yellow t-shirt. Okay, it's a fact, he's wearing a yellow t-shirt. You could ask him, why are you wearing that t-shirt? For most people, the answer is going to be, well, I got up this morning, that's what I pulled out of the drawer. But if you went back to the Philippines during the EDSA revolution some years ago, a yellow shirt had real meaning. And people who wore those shirts weren't just wearing a shirt, they were making a political statement. If you go to Thailand and you look at red shirts, again, that's a political statement. So how do you know whether an article of clothing is just an article of clothing or a political statement? Well, you can't tell just by looking at it. You have to ask the question and work out what the answer is. So let's take another example of this. We can start with a fact. The People's Action Party in Singapore won the 2020 general election. Now that fact covers the who, the what, the when, and the where. Could you write a paper based on those questions? Well, not a successful one, because anybody can pick up a newspaper and find out the answer to all those questions, and nobody's ever going to publish that. And the key thing here is that you haven't really answered the crucial points, which are, why did the PAP win? How did they win? So when you're looking at your material, what you want to be doing is asking, what question does it answer? Well, if it answers a who question or a what question, turn it into a why question. Why did that person do whatever you discovered? And then your argument in this case would have to be something like, not that the ruling party won, but the ruling party won because. Now, if you're working out a paper, let's say that you've got your answer to this is because the platform of the party, the position of the party was very popular, that the candidates were very popular, that the party had a lot of money. Well, if you have that information, your paper is all but written, because what you're going to say as your starting point, the PAP won because of the platform, the candidates, and money. And that tells me that you're going to start with an introduction that explains that the PAP won. Then you're going to talk about the platform. You're going to talk about the candidates. You're going to talk about the money. And that's done. You've done your paper right there. So if you approach a paper in that way, then it can be a fairly easy thing to write. Now, this is something that becomes a big issue for everybody pretty much in Southeast Asia. Local topics and international journals. Local details about any country are mostly interesting to people who live in that country. So Americans do an awful lot of research about the United States. Some of that research is interesting to people in other parts of the world, but a lot of it isn't. Same thing in Indonesia, same thing in any other country. For an international refereed journal to publish your article, you need to find a way to interest people outside of the country you live in. So if you're writing about Indonesia, you need to be saying to yourself, what is there about my topic that would interest people somewhere else? Maybe Malaysia. There are certain topics in Indonesia that are particularly interesting to people in Malaysia. But if you want an international refereed journal, you really want to say, okay, what can I say about Indonesia that will interest people in North America or interest people in Europe? Because those are the main audiences for international refereed journals. So this strategy you can follow. And I mean, there are lots of different ways to tackle this, but I'll give you some examples here. One is to broaden your audience. Some years ago, I was working on a book, and one of the chapters was about the Cambodian textile industry. Now, an article on that topic will have a certain number of readers who are interested in Cambodia, a certain number of people who are interested in the textile industry in Southeast Asia. But when you read the article, you discover that the only thing that kept the Cambodian textile industry going was Chinese foreign direct investment. So that is a big part of the article. So if you title the article, The Cambodian Textile Industry, you limit the number of readers. If you give the same article a title, Chinese foreign direct investment and the Cambodian textile industry, you've expanded the number of readers and made it much more likely that someone will publish it. You can also write a comparative study. Now, of course, this means you have to learn more than just your own research. But if you've done research on, pick a topic, the rice industry in Indonesia, you probably are interested in the rice industry in Thailand or the rice industry in the Philippines or Malaysia. So if you can do something comparative, then you broaden your potential readership. You can look for features of your research that will interest people elsewhere. So let me give you an example of that. Several years ago, I was involved in a workshop at UI, and one of the participants had done a study of a village in West Java. And he was interested in education. So the topic essentially was primary education in West Java. And the village he was looking at was rural. They didn't really have good connections to any communication, so people didn't have much television. The children in this village spoke Sundanese at home, and they had very little exposure to Bahasa Indonesia. But when they went to school, they had to attend classes in Indonesian. So this was one of the things that he was writing about. So how can you write about this? Well, one is that you write about the village. You write about the social context, what happens in that village. And you're not going to find very many readers for that. Or secondly, there are a number of options. I'm just giving you two here. You can discuss the situation of children whose home language and school language is different. And this is a situation that's found across Indonesia in many places, but it's also found in other countries. And if you talk about that, then again, you've done something to broaden the people who are going to be interested in your article. if you're sending an article to an international refereed journal, the journal will be almost certainly published in English. And there's certain patterns, certain ways of writing that are common to the articles that they publish. One is that they're linear. That is that they start with a proposition and then they develop that proposition and they stop. So it's just a kind of straight line through the material. They're usually deductive rather than inductive, which means they start off with a fundamentally a conclusion. And then they give you the evidence. Of course, inductive would be starting the other way. I've got this evidence, this happened, this happened, this happened, and my conclusion is this. If you do that, there's a chance that the editor looking at this won't find it, and you'll be rejected, even if you have a good paper. Papers are usually built around an argument that is drawn from the research. And then the paper presents data to support and defend the argument. The literature review is there, but it is limited to the material that's really needed to explain the argument. So an article fundamentally will answer a single research question. And, sorry. The thing. So in the sciences, there's a model which is known as IMRD, which is Introduction, Methodology, Results, and Discussion. Oftentimes for something in the social sciences or humanities, the methodology is not going to get much discussion. There's another one which is too complicated for me to go into now, but you can look this up, and that's something called Create a Research Space. Abbreviated as CARS. And this talks about several steps or several moves that you can make in the process of writing an article. Most of you have probably read more Indonesian language articles than English language articles. And the writing conventions for Asian language articles, and this is true Japan, Korea, China, down through Southeast Asia, are somewhat different from the conventions for English. And if you write in English, but you follow the conventions of Asian language writing, sometimes the article doesn't satisfy the editors and referees of international journals. Now, what I'm giving you here is based on research by several Indonesian authors. And at the end of this, I have a list of these authors. Anybody who's interested in this, we can arrange to get it sent to you, I think. But this is the kind of comment that these analyses of Indonesian writing have come up with. That in Indonesian articles, authors tend to avoid commenting on work by other writers. The feeling is that possibly this means criticizing, or it's just socially awkward. So you might say somebody else makes this point, but you don't say I agree or I disagree. That writers hesitate to express their own conclusions. Somewhat the same problem, that they feel like they're forcing their conclusion on their readers. That there's a tendency to use personal or subjective explanations when they're defending their use of data or they're defending whatever positions they are taking. There's a reliance on passive voice, and this avoids committing the author to saying this person did this thing. Now, in Indonesian, passive voice is very common. In fact, in most Asian language, it's a very common thing. It's one thing that editors of English language journals react very badly to. And if an article is full of passive voice, it will probably hurt it. A reference to authority rather than evidence to support arguments. So rather than providing evidence, somebody may say, well, this senior scholar has said this, and so, okay, we can accept that. Finally, and this is not a criticism, it's just something that editors in North America, Europe would find very odd, that there's a focus on practical applications of the research. And a lot of articles end with policy suggestions. You know, the government really should do this, or this the information I have in this article can be used in this way. Again, there's one of the reasons people do research is to help come up with practical information. But for the articles to be published in an international refereed journal, the chances are that somebody reviewing it would look at this and say, well, that's a little bit odd. Okay, so here's some recommendations. First, you need to be writing for an international audience. Now, this is easy to say and not always easy to do because you're not absolutely certain what an international audience is interested in. But one way of telling is that you read these journals and you understand after you read them what kind of points are being made, because whoever is writing that article is also writing for the audience that you're going to be writing for. You need to identify a research problem, or you might call it a research gap, and explain the significance of the research. You need to be referring to an international literature. So this, of course, requires reading what is being published in international refereed journals in your field. You need to rely on empirical evidence. This is rather than just referring to authority. And you need to draw firm conclusions. Again, this is not saying that the other way of doing it is wrong. It's simply saying if you want to get published in an international refereed journal, these things will help. And finally, you should pay attention to the format for international journal articles. So just take some articles and try to understand what's going on. And the easiest ones will be ones where the heading or subheadings in an article outline what the author is doing. So introduction, and then some factual thing. But you can also go through an article, just look at the first sentence of every paragraph and just say, what is going on here? What's the topic? Just one word or two words. And then you can begin to see the structure that the author has used. Now, as I said, all of this, this slide and this one, I've drawn from these articles on Indonesian writing. And if you haven't read them, there's a lot of good information there. So you'll see the sources later on. Okay, so preparing an article. So after you draft the article, and the word here that's important is after, then you need to be working on the titles, the title, the abstract, and the keywords. Why after? Well, because generally speaking, people change what they're doing while they're writing. And you probably won't be able to decide on a title. You won't be able to put together an abstract. You won't really be able to pick out keywords until after you've written the article. These are very important though, because they're picked up by search engines. I'm sure that everybody realizes by now that a lot of research is done online, and that people are, if you're wanting to find out about a topic, what you're likely to do is do a Google search on some word that is interesting to you, that you want to do some research about, and see what comes up. If you're involved with library research, the libraries also have specialized search engines. And again, those search engines are picking up the titles, the abstracts, and the keywords. So what you put in your title, abstract, and keyword is important, because one thing you really want is for people to find your work. That's your readers. These are visible during online searches. And I'm sure you've all had the experience of okay, here's an article I want to see. You click on that article, you discover you have to pay some ridiculous amount of money to see it, but you can read the title, you can read the abstract, and you'll see the key words. So you use these things to advertise your work. I know academics don't think they should have to advertise. That we're all sort of non-business people, but you have to advertise. You advertise your work and you attract readers. Then you look at your headings and your subheadings. It's smart sometimes to just take your article, take a sheet of paper, go through it, write down whatever headings and subheadings you may have put into it. Think about whether you need more. But when you read through them, they should make sense. They should, step by step, take people through what you're saying in the article. And finally, you check the citations and the bibliography and see if they're well done. Now I'm going to talk about some of these elements in a little bit more detail. So what do you do with a title? Well, the title, of course, has to indicate the topic. It should position your material in time and place, and it should appeal to potential readers. And it has to be short, about 10 or 12 words. Now, this sounds very difficult, and I have to say it's not always easy. Working on book titles, frequently what happened was that I got into a dialogue with the author. The author would have a title, and usually authors' titles are terrible. So we would have a discussion. I would suggest something. The author would suggest something. We would go back and forth, back and forth. But eventually we would find that we're kind of focused in on a few words. And once that happened, we could start thinking about, okay, what title would actually work and be appealing and informative. Titles should not include a lot of jargon, a lot of obscure terms. Don't try to be clever or cute, and don't put in unfamiliar abbreviations. So if you're writing about the World Health Organization, you can probably use WHO. If you're writing about the United Nations, you can use UN. But you're trying to attract people who may not be familiar with abbreviations that are very familiar to you. So be careful with that. Okay, then there's the abstract. And abstracts need to be short, maybe 150 to 200 words. And they need to state the research topic, answer the research question, indicate the significance of the research. And finally, when I say stand alone as an explanation, what I mean by that is that after somebody reads it, they should have a pretty good idea of what the paper is about. Now, I've had people say, well, yes, but if I do that, nobody's going to... So in the abstract, you're laying down your claim. You're explaining probably how you're going to support it. But it doesn't mean that you've made the case, that you haven't proved anything until you actually put the material into the article and people read it. So what the abstract should not do, it should not try to describe the literature. It should not explain or criticize the work of other writers. And you should not stuff it with a lot of detail. Keep it brief, but make sure it is informative. So I don't like abstracts where somebody comes along and says, this article will discuss A, B, and C. Well, because those A, B, and C are usually facts. And those facts are not enough to make an article. That's the who, what, when, and where. What I want to see is somebody writing an abstract that says, based on a study of A, B, and C, I conclude that, and then state the conclusion. I conclude that the PAP won the election because of these points, and give me the points. Something else that is really troubling, and a lot of people do this. In this article, I attempt to show, or I try to show. And I always feel like if you haven't showed it, then you're not ready to write the article. So what I want to see is, in this article, I show that this happened, or I demonstrate. Now, if that's too strong, well, you can still always say, in this article, I argue that this happened. But if you're saying I'm only attempting it, well, by the time you write the article, you should know whether your attempt has succeeded or not. Okay, keywords. Keywords are designed to attract readers and guide online searches. You can probably get by with about 5 to 10. And they need to be specific. So oftentimes people send me pieces with keywords that are very broad and very general. It's useful to say this article is about Indonesia, even though there are an awful lot of articles about Indonesia. But beyond that, you need to say something that will tell people in 1 or 2 words what you're doing in your article. Usually short phrases, sometimes 2 to 4 words, are better than single terms. I know we call it a key word, but it actually can be more than 1 word. And you want to do words that are frequently used in your article. There's something called a word cluster analysis tool. And if you search for that online, you can find it. And it will help you discover what words you've used very often in your article. When you've picked your words, and then you would be smart to take a look at something like Google Scholar, key in your word, and see what comes up. And what you're looking for is articles that seem to resemble what you're talking about, because you're hoping that it will attract a set of readers. And if the articles that come up when you try out your keyword are going to attract the same readers you want, it's probably a pretty good word. As for citations and bibliography, journals will have a style sheet. And you want to get hold of that style sheet and follow it. Generally speaking, a journal will insist on the same style all the way through the journal. There are 2 standard formats for citations. One is in-text citations, that is where you have a bracket, and then you have the author, the date, and if you're doing a quotation, you have to have the page number. This is something people often leave out, but the author, the date, and the page number. The other way is footnotes or endnotes, which are put together the same way. In this case, you give full details of the source the first time you cite it. Then after that, you can give a short form. Now, some journals want a bibliography and some don't. But if they do, the format will depend on the format of your citation. So if you're using in-text citations, the bibliography will have the author's name followed by the date in brackets. Okay, then we have the literature review. And this is something that a lot of people overdo. Bear in mind that what is going to get your article published is what you're saying that's new, the data, the analysis that you provide, and that the literature review doesn't have anything new. What you're doing in the literature review is explaining what other people have done. Now, you need to do this so that people understand where your work fits in. But if you spend too much time on the literature review, people maybe won't even find your material. So be careful with this. Be selective. Don't try to list all the articles that you found on your topic. And it's also smart not to build the literature review around authors, but around ideas. So you get literature reviews where people say, well, this author, date 2012, said this. And this other author, date 2014, said something else, and they go on and on and on. What works much better is that you talk about ideas. So just as a simple example, the focus of studies of nationalism has shifted from ideology and group loyalty to print capitalism. And you quote Benedict Anderson. Okay, then you can say, critics of this approach have said the following, and you can quote them. But you're focusing there on ideas and not on the author. And limit the literature review to articles that are actually relevant to what you're saying in your article. Oftentimes they're older articles, but maybe they're important in the past, but not so important now. So, in summary, what you have to do as an author is in this first column. You have a topic, and you want to introduce it, explain it, justify it, position it. Position it, that means in the literature. And about that topic, you want to make an argument. And the argument, you have to introduce it, explain it, position it, and support it. And finally, you'll have some kind of a summary. Okay, in your article, you will have these parts. You'll have a title, you'll have an abstract, you'll have keywords, an introduction, literature review. You'll have the body of your article. And in that body, you'll have certain sections and certain subsections. You'll have a conclusion, you'll have notes, you'll have a bibliography. So what you need to do is figure out where each one of these parts is going to go into these sections. Just sit down and try and think it through. Where am I going to explain my topic? Well, I've already said you need to let's talk about introduction. You need to introduce your topic in the abstract. You better introduce it too in the introduction. What about the argument? Well, you probably need to introduce that in the abstract as well. But you probably don't want to explain it there, but you will maybe explain it in a bit in the introduction, but really you're going to talk about it here. So think about what pieces of an article you have to work with and where these things are going to go into it. But also be thinking about what the editor is going to be thinking about as well. As I've said earlier, the audience is worried about the editor is worried about the audience, the significance. He wants to know if the author is authoritative. And somewhere along the way, you probably are going to say to the editor, well, this was my PhD topic, or I've had a big research project on this subject, or I spent 5 years in my spare time working on it, something like that, that will tell the editor why anybody should pay attention to what you have to say on that topic. Okay, the argument, well, there'll be a question, is there a use of theory, the data, the analysis, is the internal logic sensible? The writing, well, clarity, structure, how you move through the ideas and how you link ideas. The mechanics, the citation, the bibliography, and then ethics. Have you plagiarized? You better not. And have you cleared copyright? So these are all things that the editor is going to want to be paying attention to. Now, the references I have, you don't need to sit there and frantically write them, I don't think, because I hope AIFIS is able to send these out or put them online somewhere. But I have here something about revising a dissertation, some general points about academic publishing. Contrastive rhetoric is where people are talking about the differences in academic writing in different languages. And so here's some basic articles about that. And then these are the pieces on Indonesian writing that are in English. I have another list of them, which is people, same type of study, same type of information, but in Indonesian. And there are a couple of figures who are very prominent in this. Adnan, Safnil, and so on. Anyway, this is the end of the second part, so we will now have another short break.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for the second part. Let's have a short break, and then we'll be back around 5 to 6 minutes. I think what we're going to do later, we'll compile these questions until the end, because we have many questions already.
Okay.
Some of them will probably be able to answer quickly, but there are some that may require more elaboration.
Right.
But
okay.
Yeah, just take a break, Lev. Yeah.
Okay. Well, about 3 or 4 minutes, we can come back.
Okay.
Okay.
Mbak Neta itu sudah selesai. It's really great presentation, Professor Paul. I learned so much.
Yeah, we're having a break at the moment.
Thank you, Ibu Poppy.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Paul.
Yes.
Well, I hope it's coming through clearly. Of course, I'm not hearing it.
Very clearly.
It's coming through clearly, and I always learn from these. It's great mid-career, sort of booster training. So.
Okay, so we basically have 2 hours left. I'll probably use about maybe a bit more than 1 hour, maybe an hour and a quarter or something, but we'll see how fast it goes.
We do have a lot of questions coming in. So.
Well, we may need to just collect them and do written answers to some of this.
Yes, for those we will not be able to answer today, we will compile them and we'll send them over to you, and and then you can provide the answers in writing.
How many is a lot?
29 plus a few more from YouTube, so more than 30.
That's not
Yeah,
so
around
bad.
30.
Yeah, very
30
popular.
question.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Paul, one of the benefits of doing written answers, maybe, we may be able to create an FAQ.
Yes, document.
Yeah.
And that's something that could live beyond any individual workshop.
Well, I was thinking all along, a couple of days ago, that if we had written answers, then it's more durable than the oral answers. But yeah, the FAQ would actually be very useful.
But some of them is like Paul mentioned during previous session, that some of them is like the follow-up session or something. That some of the question, I believe that is like in the third session of Paul.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't really matter, because even if that's the case, if we make it an FAQ, then we can, people who haven't even come to this session can look at them.
Yeah.
Munandar, we could share it with RISTEK BRIN also.
Yeah. And then we can put
it becomes a document that can be given to anybody.
Yeah. And we can put it in the website or something in the right.
That of course requires polishing, but yes, it could be done.
Yeah.
And why don't we plan on preparing one,
Yeah. So we put the slide, if it's okay, and then below the slide is like the Q&A.
Well, you could do that. But first of all, those references at the end ought to be put up somehow. And I can add to them the Indonesian language references. They're probably, I mean, I haven't done a complete search on this, but I have 10 or so Indonesian language articles as well. So we may as well put that up somehow so people can just go and get that as a reference.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we go on?
Yeah.
Yeah, please do.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we can go on.
Okay, here we go. Okay, well, after you write your article, the next step is getting it published. So let me talk a bit about that. I started off saying that the main thing that an editor looks for is readers. And you as a writer then need to find your audience. And the way you set about doing that is that you look at a journal and you figure out what topics the journal publishes on. So with the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies, back when I was editing it, we got a lot of articles on religion in Southeast Asia. We got a lot of articles, I think, on urban studies. The same thing is true of a book publisher. And NUS Press has, in the end, done a lot of articles that are country-based. But in addition to that, there's been quite a lot of urban studies. So publishers like to do this because if they develop a reputation for a certain topic, then they will have people coming to look at them if they want to buy something on that topic. So that helps the reader find information. It helps the publisher sell books. Now, if you look at what's gone on with journals, the older journals often publish on a particular geographical area. The Journal of Asian Studies, the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies, or possibly about a particular country. So journals on Japan, journals on China. A lot of newer journals have a much narrower focus. And one reason that's possible is because of the World Wide Web. So you have people globally who may have an interest in some particular subject. And if you can get to everybody, then you can have a journal get enough readers. But in the past, that was very hard to do. But with the web, it becomes possible to reach a readership that will sustain a journal with a narrow focus. At the other extreme, there are journals that are, you could call a mega journal. I'll talk a bit about that later too, but the mega journals publish on all topics. So the classic is one called PLOS 1. PLOS is PLOS, the Public Library of Science. They're publishing, if I'm not mistaken, around 30,000 articles a year, all fields. And before you get excited about that, they charge a lot of money. And so you have to wait to find out how much, but it is a lot. You also want to check if a journal favors a certain approach. So something like comparative studies in society and history, well, obviously they're looking for comparative material. And some journals are particularly interested in theory. Some journals are particularly heavy on data. In any case, you want to understand what the journal does. And sometimes they tell you clearly, sometimes you do have to look at the articles they've published. Then you follow the submission guidelines. And journals, I think every journal that you'll ever come across online will have submission guidelines. And so you want to be paying attention to what they tell you to do and also understand what they're telling you not to do. So if a journal says, we want articles between 6,000 and 8,000 words, that tells you your 14,000 word article will not be welcome. 9,000 words maybe, but you need to follow the submission guidelines pretty closely, because if the journal has said upper limit is 8,000 and they see 14,000, they won't look any further. They will just say, nope, that's not for us. Okay, preliminary inquiries. should you contact an editor before you submit a manuscript? For journal articles, the answer is no. Editors normally do not encourage preliminary inquiries. The guidelines of the journal will tell you how to proceed, but in most cases, you will be asked to complete your article and then you can submit it. For a book manuscript, the answer is yes. Book publishers do expect you to write and ask about whether they might be interested. And you do not want to send a book manuscript unless you're invited to do that. Now, generally speaking, what a publisher will ask for is a 1 or 2 page summary of what you're doing in the book, and maybe a sample chapter. But nobody in the book publishing business wants to be dealing with a big manuscript that they haven't invited. And if you're trying to get a book published, you want to find out who the appropriate editor is. Now, in the case of NUS Press, we were a fairly small operation, and I did a lot of the acquisitions. And this means I was acquiring books on topics where I wasn't really a specialist. But I knew people in the field, so I would go off and I would get an opinion from them. The big presses often do have somebody who is something of a specialist. So if you look at something like the University of California Press, they have an editor for Asia. They have an editor for anthropology. Now, if your article is about anthropology and Asia, then you have a question. And you can write to either one of them. And if the anthropology editor says, well, this really is for the Asia editor, then that will be done at the press. But you need to identify who the right person to send your piece to. And acquisitions editors do not like receiving something that says, dear editor. It says you haven't paid much attention to the press, you haven't done your homework. Okay, so picking a journal. Journals will explain the topics they cover. They're going to serve a community of readers. And as a contributor, you're going to be joining an ongoing conversation. Now, you have something called citation indexes, which I imagine everyone's familiar with. And there are journals, a lot of journals actually, that are in one or another citation index. Generally speaking, if you don't publish in a citation index journal, it will receive much less credit than if you do. So how do you identify international refereed journals? Well, there are 2 major citation indexes. One is Scopus, and I'm sure this is not news to anybody. But Simago is an outfit that analyzes the data on journals in Scopus. So if you go to the Simago webpage, I have it here, but if you just do a search on Simago, then you'll find it. And you click on journal rankings. Then you can select a subject area and a subject category. And it will give you a list of journals. Now, if you want to get into a Web of Science journal, which is usually seen as more prestigious, there's a box there that you can click, and it will filter out everything except the Web of Science journals. Now, as for the Web of Science itself, they also have a master list of their journals. And you can get that if you go to this web page here. You'll have to sign up with them. You have to register before they'll let you see their list. And then if you have a manuscript you'd like to publish, you can click on Match Manuscript. And then you type in the manuscript title. And you copy the abstract into a box that they have. And it will offer you some journal titles that seem to match what you've done. Now, the problem here is I've experimented with this. And the journals that it offers usually were not very they weren't the kind of journal that I was looking for, but it's worth a try. Okay, for submissions. Okay, journals will give you instructions, and most journals want electronic copies sent by email. Now, in the past, journals asked for a physical manuscript to be sent. Most journals don't want that anymore, and I would say you should not send it unless you're asked to do it. A lot of journals now are using an automated submission system, and there are basically two. One is called Scholar One, one is called Editorial Manager. And to do something on either one of them, the first thing you have to do is register as a contributor. Once you've done that, you upload your article, and then you can track the progress of the article through the system. And you'll also receive correspondence and reports through the system. So this is what you'll see. First, a lot of them will ask you for an identifier. And a research identifier will link all the work that an author has done. So if you get a research identifier, you can use it to track your own work. Now, there are two major ones. One is called ORCID, O-R-C-I-D, so it's ORCID without an H. And to get one, you just go to this web page and you register. The other, which is run by it's a company called Clarivate Analytics, and they're the ones that handle the Web of Science, what used to be called ISI. They have created something called Publons. This is very new, but you can get a Publons ID. And to get that, you go to this web page. You can just do a search on Publons alone and you'll get there. And again, you register. Once your manuscript is submitted, it will also have an ID. And if you are published in a journal that is in the Scopus Citation Index, you will automatically be assigned a Scopus ID. So you're being ID'd all over the place. But the only ones you have to apply for are the ORCID and the Publons. Now, some of this can be very useful because if you have the ID, then you can learn a lot about who's reading your material, how many people, how many downloads it's had, and so on. So it can be very useful. This is what you're going to see when you use the automated submissions. So if it's a journal, I mean, these things are part of the journal webpage. So you pick a journal and you say, I want to submit, and then they will give you access to their submission app. So if it's Scholar One, the first step is you register, but then after that, you put in the type of article it is, the title, and the abstract. Now, the type of article can be, most of yours will be a research article, but they have some other types listed. Then you upload the file. You put in the keywords. You give your name, your institution. If you have co-authors, you put them in there. Honestly, I don't know what comes under reviewers because I haven't actually submitted through one of these. But it may be they're saying, is there anybody that should not be invited to review this? Because some people have enemies, and there's hardly any point in asking your enemy to review your paper. Then you have a place where you can put in comments, and you then review what you've keyed in and you submit it. Okay, if you are going to a journal that uses Editorial Manager, very similar. You have a set of blanks basically that you fill in. You attach the file, add information, comments, and some information about the manuscript itself. So it's not complicated. And this shows you basically what you're going to see. Now, what if your manuscript is accepted? Well, after you stop being really happy and running around the room and cheering, you still have a lot of work to do. You have to prepare a final version for publication. Now, the first thing you want to do is go through the text very carefully. And actually, with going through the text, I have a suggestion for you, because you look at the journal and you can measure how much text there is on a page, by which I mean how many inches across and how many inches from top to bottom. Sometimes it's really, and how big the type is too. And sometimes it's really smart to change the setting on your Word document to match the journal. And the reason is, it's very common that somebody has a manuscript on A4 paper. They've read it, and they think they found all the corrections. Then they submit it. And when they submit it, it comes back as a page proof, only now it's set in this different format. And you read it that way and you find things that you missed. And it's better to find those before it goes in. And a Word document is very easy. You change the margins, you change the size of the type, try to match what's in the journal, and just read it through and see what you discover. Any illustrations you have. When you're submitting an article, generally you want to have low resolution images if you have pictures in it. But for publication, you probably will need to send high resolution images. If there are any copyright or permissions issues, you have to settle them. These are the responsibility of an author. So if you're using a photograph from somebody else, some other publication, you probably need to get permission. If you're quoting something, if it's been published after about 1925, you probably have to get copyright approval. So if you have trouble with that, let's say you have a short quotation and you have trouble getting permission, you probably need to rewrite it in your own words and put a footnote to whoever the original source was, rather than using the actual words. The journal's style sheet will tell you what they want in terms of preparation of the text. Follow it. The journal editor may send you questions. And if you have questions at this stage, you write to the editor and say, well, what can you tell me about this? Or what should I do about that? Because now the editor is your friend. At some point, you'll be sent page proofs. And often a journal will send those out and say, you have about 2 days to do this and get it back. You shouldn't, at this point, find very many mistakes. In the past, page proofs were different, because in the past, people sent in a typed manuscript, and the typesetting was retyping everything, and a lot of mistakes came in. Now what happens is that whatever you send on the Word document is flowed into the production. So any mistakes that you have in your Word document will still be there. But generally, there will not be new mistakes put in, which isn't to say it's impossible. So you need to read carefully. You'll probably be asked to sign a publishing agreement. Now, when I started off, I'd send an article in, somebody would say, yes, we'll publish it, or no, we won't. If they said yes, I would sit around and wait. I'd get the page proofs, I would look at that, and then I'd get a copy of the journal. These days, there's a lot more legal requirement. The journal wants to be sure that you have agreed that they can publish your material and what the status of the copyright is. So they will send, in most cases, a publishing agreement. You read it, make sure you're happy with it, and then you sign it if you want to get published. Just remember, anything you publish, once it's in print, it will be with you for your entire career. You want to be sure it says what you want it to say. Okay, so this contracts, as I said, most journals will have an agreement. Something will be said in that agreement about copyright. And there are two options for the most part. Sometimes the journal says they want you to transfer copyright to them. A lot of people don't like this, but actually it's a protection, because if somebody steals your material, then you have the journal backing you up. the journal might also ask for exclusive rights to publish your material. Now, basically, this comes to the same thing, because the journal needs to have a clear right to put the material into print. So what can you do with your material? Well, journals will normally allow you to post the final version of your article on your personal website. And usually, though, they do not allow you to post the version of record. Now, the version of record is the version that is printed in the publication. And if you receive that, you might be able to send it to some friends, but you should not put it onto your website. There are also a lot of people who post articles on academia.edu or ResearchGate. Technically, if you do that, you're probably violating your agreement with the journal. And it's worthwhile understanding just how that works. So talk to your journal editor if you have in mind doing something like that. So let's talk a little bit about these two. Academia.edu looks like a university website. It's not. They got the edu before they were very strict about how to issue these things. Oops, sorry. The agreement for academia.edu says that you grant academia.edu a worldwide license to reproduce, prepare derivative works based upon, distribute, and otherwise use your member content. In other words, you've given them your material. Most people don't read these agreements and aren't aware of this. And some people say, well, I don't care. But your publisher probably does. The agreement also says that you assert that you own anything you upload and are not infringing the intellectual property rights of others. Well, probably you are infringing the intellectual property right of the journal you published it in. And you agree to indemnify academia.edu if there's any legal action and they are fined. Well, Elsevier has tried to take legal action. They've issued takedown notices. Well, what that agreement says, if academia.edu is ever taken to court and there's a big penalty, they will just be able to pass it on to everybody who ever posted an article. Major university presses. I first talked to Cambridge University Press about this, but most university presses that have journals ask authors not to post articles on ResearchGate or academia.edu. Okay, then there's informal publication. And again, there are questions about what you can do with your material. There are university repositories. And university repositories are good places to put a draft of your article. Frequently, people can do searches and find it, and your university will probably like it. What about your personal web page? Well, again, if you have a draft of your article, you can put it there. Then there are preprint servers. Now, these were initially in the sciences. And the idea here is you've written an article. You want people to comment on it. Now, in the past, what people did was to send a copy of their article around to 10 or 15 friends. Would you read it? Would you comment? Well, now you can put it onto a preprint server. And it's out there for anybody in the world to read and comment on. Recently, you started seeing these turn up for the humanities and social sciences. So this one is, oops, sorry. So this one handles humanities and social sciences. And there's also a preprint server for Indonesian research specifically. It's about the only country one that I know about. First, there was one called, I don't know how to pronounce these things, but INA Archive. And I just looked it up and discovered that it was shut down on the 7th of October. There's a note on that site that says, we're very sorry that we have to close it down. They don't say exactly why. However, LIPI has now created a similar sort of thing. And so the reference to it is there. It's useful to know what a journal's policy is with regard to posting an article on a preprint server. And there are also post-print servers, which is where you can put an article after it's been completely refereed and proofread and is all ready for publication. If you want to see what the policy is, you can look up something called Sherpa Romeo. And rather than worry about the web page, you can just do a search on Sherpa Romeo. And that will explain to you, the Romeo part will explain to you what journal policies are on preprints and other uses of your material. Okay, I mentioned mega journals earlier on. So the Public Library of Science has a journal called PLOS One, and it was established in 2006. They publish about 30,000 articles per year. Their policy basically is publish first, judge later. They will accept any article, any paper that's judged to be technically sound. That is the research methodology acceptable? And they will charge you $1,495 per article. Now, this is open access, so it's available to anybody. All you have to do is pay them. Now, there's a problem with this model. It sounds like they should make a lot of money. And they do give discounts. To be fair, they do give discounts if you're from a less prosperous country. So an Indonesian author submitting something to PLOS One should get a cheaper rate. Whether cheap enough or not, that's a question. In 2017, PLOS One collected around $35 million from people publishing articles there. But their expenses were $3 million more than that. And it's obviously a problem for any publication, even something as big as that, if they are losing $3 million a year. So I don't know what the future is, but anyway, that's there. You can look at it, give it a try if you want. There are other mega journals as well. They tend to focus on science. But there's Sage Open, there's Helion by Elsevier, something called the Open Library of the Humanities. And they operate in a somewhat similar way. I think the Open Library of the Humanities doesn't charge. But most of them, apart from the Open Library of Humanities, will accept articles in any discipline. So some general advice. When you're preparing a manuscript, sloppiness, that is typographical errors, spelling mistakes, will hurt your chances. Particularly now, because Microsoft Word is there putting little lines under any word that is suspect. So you shouldn't have any trouble figuring out where there's a typographical error, a spelling mistake. Sometimes people send in a submission and they have tracked their changes and they've made comments and they've sent it to their friends, and the friends have made comments on the manuscript. And when I open the manuscript, all I see is this whole sea of red because all the changes and all the comments are there. You don't want me to see that, and I don't want to see it. So before you submit a manuscript, you remove all the comments. You click on Accept Changes, and you turn off Track Changes. Sometimes people send a manuscript and they've spent a lot of time putting fancy typefaces in. They've centered their title, they've left a lot of space, created some kind of an artistic layout. It's a complete waste of your time because the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of it. All I want is a simple layout. I don't need things in 40-point type to show that that's your title. And finally, this is something that is inherited from the typewriter. People put 2 spaces after a full stop or after a colon. Don't do that. Computers use proportional spacing. They create enough space after the full stop, the period, and after the colon. If you put two spaces in, it makes the manuscript look strange. And what I will do as an editor is do a global search for two spaces and replace them all with one space. And I have destroyed thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of spaces over the years that way. And every time I do it, I think some poor person has sat there and hit the space bar thousands of times. They probably have carpal tunnel syndrome just from clicking the space bar. And they've just complete waste of time. So don't do that. Okay, this is the end of part one. We'll take another break now, and then we'll move on to the part about the state of academic publishing.
Okay, thank you, Paul, again for the excellent presentation on preparing your manuscript. Let's take another break here, probably 5 to 6 minutes, and then we'll come back.
Bella.
Yes.
Yeah. Just you probably wonder what I was buzzing around doing when I disappeared early on. So I didn't have enough signal in the room I had all set up.
Sure. Yeah.
So
You're very clear now. So.
I had to relocate.
Great choice. Location, location, location.
Well, yeah, but I had to bring out lights and get all set up in a totally different place.
Yes.
Which was too bad because my original setup is gorgeous. It just didn't work.
Unfortunately.
Well, it happens. I'll try to find a booster of some kind so I can use it in the future. But
right, yeah.
This didn't go well.
Good thing we tried it beforehand. So.
Well, I was hearing all that funny noise in the headset, and eventually I thought, well, it must be the strength of the signal. And sure enough, I looked down and I had about a bar and a half, maybe 2 bars, and it just wasn't enough. So
yeah.
So where I am now is fine.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Well, it's not perfect. You just can't see how imperfect it is.
Well, that's the thing. See, from the audience perspective, it's perfect.
Yeah, well, the virtual background helps. It looked like I'm sitting in late afternoon outside my house. That is outside my house, by the way. But
wonderful.
Yeah.
Actually, very different from us here.
Yeah, well.
The first snow just arrived today.
Oh, we had snow yesterday.
Oh, yesterday already.
Yeah, well. It's more coming, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I just wanted to remind everyone again, tolong dipergunakan kolom Q&A untuk bertanya. And also, Bella or Joseph, would you like to mention something about the flow of the questions? We have many great questions, and perhaps we will try to answer every single one of them. However, perhaps you would like to announce to all attendees.
Okay.
Sure. Silakan.
Yeah. Thank you, Neta. Bahasa Indonesia kali ya.
Baik, silakan.
Oke. Ya, pertanyaan-pertanyaan masuk cukup banyak. Kita akan coba menjawab seluruh pertanyaan yang masuk, tetapi kalau misalnya waktu tidak cukup, ya belum sempat terjawab, dan kita akan membuat menjadi tertulis, dan nanti akan kita post di website AIFIS jawaban dari pertanyaan-pertanyaan ini. Termasuk pertanyaan juga sudah dijawab hari ini akan dipost juga, jadi bukan hanya yang tidak terjawab. Jadi bagi para hadirin semua bisa nanti setelah webinar ini bisa cek ke web AIFIS di aifis.org dan juga di medsos kami untuk informasi mengenai di mana untuk mengakses jawaban dari pertanyaan-pertanyaan yang ada. Itu pengumuman dari kami. Kalau misalnya nanti waktunya tidak mencukupi, seperti itu. Nah, bagi semua yang ingin bertanya, silahkan gunakan fasilitas Q&A yang ada di Zoom. Bagi yang di YouTube, silahkan menggunakan YouTube Comments. Nanti kita akan coba tampung semuanya. Terima kasih.
Thank you.
Saya pun bisa mengerti.
Yeah.
Iya, bisa lah.
No,
So
the other day when you were, it depends whether you're speaking standard Indonesian or not. If it's standard, I'm fine. If the sort of back and forth the other day was totally beyond me.
When we were testing.
Yeah. Okay, are we ready?
Yeah,
Yes,
so
please.
if you're ready, we're ready.
Okay.
If you need more break, that's fine also.
No.
Take your time.
I think we can, if I do this, then we'll see how much time we do have left. But
Okay, go ahead.
okay, so there we go. And okay. So for this part, I'm going to talk about issues and trends in scholarly communications. And we're using scholarly communications rather than academic publishing because some of what's going on now is non-conventional. Let's put it that way. So first of all, let's take a look at what's been happening with academic publishing. Now, this data is from Simago, which is the one I mentioned earlier. And it talks here about the origins of citable publications. And if you go back to 1996, which is the earliest data they have, Asia was lagging far behind Western Europe and far behind the United States. So that's here. Oops, sorry. That's here. So 10 years later, we see publishing in Asia catching up with the publications from North America. And by 20 years after that, we see that publications from Asia have surpassed publications from, so here's this line is Europe. So publications have surpassed publications from Europe. And if we move on to 2019, the figures are here. And you can see that publishing in Asia more than doubled the amount of publication coming out of the United States. Now, not surprisingly, a lot of that has to do with China. So here's some data. Also, a lot of this has to do, this is all subjects, a lot of it has to do with the sciences. So you can see the figures here for all subjects from 1996 and 2019 for the US, for Asia, for China, and also for Indonesia. And you do see a very, very, actually quite impressive jump between 1996 and 2019, even though the Indonesian output, of course, lags far behind what you're getting out of China. What's interesting too is what's happening in the social sciences and humanities. And again, we have the data for the whole period, but Indonesia was not producing very much in 1996. And again, there's a very strong increase by 2019. But what's even more interesting is that if you look at the list of publications from Asia, Indonesia now is in third place in the social sciences after China and India. In the arts and humanities, Indonesia is in second place after China. So there's been a lot of progress. It's obvious there's a lot of room for additional progress. But Indonesian publications are beginning to have an impact. So let's talk about scholarly publishing. And I call it the strange business of scholarly publishing because if you showed this to anybody in business, they would say this is crazy. So the way it works, the producers of academic writing, the scholars, and that means you, do not make money from what you produce. And the consumers of academic writing, that's scholars, that's you again, do not pay for what you use. Of course, the reason for that you don't pay is that your university library pays. Publishing decisions are not based on commercial prospects, but based on scholarship. So this is a business model that seems absolutely crazy. Premier journals are receiving hundreds of manuscripts each year, and the major journals are rejecting more than 90% of all submissions. As I said before, authors don't receive payment, but in fact, what's starting to happen is that authors are being asked to pay when they submit a manuscript. Reviewers, the referees that do the peer review, also are not paid. Now, these are people who are experts in their field, and yet they provide their time, their effort, their expertise free of charge. They're providing all of this. The authors, the editors frequently are not paid either. And they're providing this to a journal that is being published sometimes by a major commercial press. And these commercial presses are making huge profits. Elsevier is the largest publisher of journals. Their profit margin is around 35% per year. And their revenues run above $3 billion. So there are people who are saying, well, this is nuts. Why are we doing this? Why are we donating all of this effort, all of this knowledge to a commercial publisher? Well, this has created a situation where there are competing models of publishing. The university presses, commercial academic presses, and an open access movement. So we're going to talk, or I'm going to talk, you're going to listen, I guess, about university presses, commercial presses, and open access. The university presses. Now, of course, everybody knows about really old university presses like Oxford and Cambridge. But a lot of what they did in the past was to publish dictionaries, they published philosophy, they published on religion. Research universities, as we know them today, got their start in the 1870s. And Johns Hopkins University was probably the first, but other universities, University of Chicago, a couple in Tokyo, followed up on this very quickly. And their idea, though, was that the research that was being done had value, but it did not have commercial value. And commercial publishers were not going to want to publish the articles, the material that was discovered. So they started up not-for-profit publishing operations, the university press. Mainly these university presses published monographs. By the 1960s, generally speaking, a university press would publish around 2,000 copies of a monograph. They would sell enough of these copies to cover their costs. By 2020, a lot of the university presses are printing less than 500 copies, sometimes just 300 or 400. This does not actually let them make any money. And university presses now tend to lose money when they publish a monograph. They price, we'll talk about the digital platform in a minute, so I won't bring it up here. They price their books, the university presses price their books to sell to individuals and to libraries. And they rely on sales to make some money, but beyond that, they have to have university support to cover their expenses. Okay, now commercial academic publishing. So a new model turns up in the late 20th century. A group a very small group, actually, of European publishers began acquiring other publishers. And it's just an accumulation of small presses. And along the way, they also acquired a number of major scientific journals. And they began putting these journals out, charging very high prices. They were focused on sales to university libraries. And they created long-term contracts with the libraries, and these contracts covered their costs. They would print for books no more than 200 or 300 copies, and they sell these at something like 150 to 200 US dollars per copy. Now, I don't spend that kind of money on books, and they don't care because they're not trying to sell these books to me. They're not trying to sell their journals to me. They're only selling to libraries. So on the one side, commercial academic publishing, commercial academic publishing still has a number of small operations, but it is dominated by a very small number of huge operations, principally Elsevier, Springer, Taylor and Francis, which has Routledge, and Wiley. These small operations generally are struggling because they are not able to compete with the big ones. So how did this all come about? Well, in the 1990s, printing began to change. Computerized layout and typesetting took hold. New printing presses were necessary to use digital materials. And this led in turn to electronic distribution. So people for a while were printing books more efficiently. And then because it was possible on the web to distribute the same material electronically, ebooks and e-journals started to appear. When this first happened, libraries were not very interested. But as time passed, they began seeing a lot of advantages to ebooks and e-journals. The large commercial publishers had enough money to invest in digital platforms, so they could produce the ebooks and e-journals and distribute them. Most university presses didn't have enough money for this. The exceptions, Oxford University Press, Cambridge University Press, University of California Press, have their own e-book and e-journal operations, but most university presses don't. And this is getting to be a problem because libraries now want digital publications, and this gives commercial publishers a huge advantage. Now, what are the advantages of digital publication? Well, first of all, you can have electronic transmission of files. So nobody is sending physical manuscripts around anymore. You can do print on demand, which means that if a press in Singapore wants to print a copy of a book in the United States, wants to sell a copy in the United States, they don't have to print it here and mail it or ship it. They can ask somebody in the United States to print a copy of the book and send it off to the buyer from the US and not from here. And this is starting to appear in a lot of the world, so that you have people doing print-on-demand services in Australia, Japan, and even in Singapore, we're starting to get this. So what you're going to find probably in the future is that bookstores may not stock very many copies, but they may be able to print a copy for you on the spot. Digital publication allows for the use of color, large-scale maps, audio files, video files within a digital book, an ebook. You can have live links to the source materials that an author has used. And I presume you've all seen some of this, where you're reading an article and you look down at the footnotes and you discover that there is a link there. And if you click on that link, it will take you to the original article that is being cited. You can have searchable text. So you don't have to go to an index. You don't have to create an index. If you're looking for something in the book, you just do a search, and then you will be taken to every time that word appears. And you can have digital archives, which have long-term storage of electronic files. Now, this is important because one of the criticisms of e-publishing was the question of whether 20 or 30 or 40 years from now, you're going to be able to read all these digital books. There's some bad examples in the past. I have a friend who worked for the Library of Congress, and somewhere around 2000, he was telling me that his project at that time was to take files that had been digitized, books that had been digitized by the Library of Congress in the 1980s, and try to recover them because nobody could read those files any longer. So for a long time, there was a great concern that, yes, we're digitizing everything, but maybe technology is going to change. Maybe it won't be possible in the future to read the things that are being digitized. Now, there have been efforts to try to track digital publications, but this does remain a problem. And of course, storage facilities don't last forever either. So there is a risk with all this electronic material. Finally, digital publication reduces the cost for a publisher because you don't print, store, or ship physical books. Okay, so this has given a lot of benefit, a lot of advantage to the commercial academic presses, and they're charging huge sums of money. Academics watched all this, and especially librarians watched all this and said, wow, we're paying a fortune for this material, and sooner or later, we're not going to be able to afford it. So in 1998, there was an effort to launch an open access movement. And so instead of charging a lot of money for everything, the open access movement wants it to be free. It was created to compete with the commercial academic presses. And the objective was to arrange free online access to all scholarly research. Now, open access does require an online platform. And the problem for open access has always been there are still costs. Even if you're not printing it, you still have to referee things, you have to edit things, you have to lay out the material. You have overhead charges, you have staff you have to pay. So how do you cover the cost of something that you're going to give away? And the simple answer is you charge an article processing fee. Who's going to pay that fee? Well, generally speaking, it's got to be the author. Now, the open access movement says, no, the author won't actually have to pay out of pocket, because what the author will do is go to the university or get a research grant, and then the university or the grant will cover the cost of the publication. This sometimes works and sometimes it doesn't. But I was talking to somebody from the Philippines about this one time. And I said, well, you know, if you want to publish an article with Cambridge University Press and have it be open access, you will have to pay Cambridge $2,800. Well, he said, that means I will never do that. He said, in fact, here in the Philippines, if they charge us $1, we probably can't pay that either. A lot of governments and a lot of sorry, let me just go back to that. A lot of governments and funding agencies now require that anything that they pay for has to be an open access publication. So this is becoming bigger and bigger. And the problem of how to pay for it is also becoming bigger. Well, what's happening to the commercial publishers? They're obviously worried about this, because if everything is open access, then all of these journals that they're charging large sums of money for won't be able to be sold. So they have come up with something they call a transformative agreement. They make an agreement with a university. and there are several, say, with the University of California system. So what they want to do is make all of their journals open access, but they have to be paid something to cover the cost of the journal. And the way they set this up is to say, all right, the university will pay a fee when one of their staff members publishes an article in one of that publisher's journals. And so it isn't paid by the individual author, it is paid by the university. And the article will then be open access. The problem here is, if this continues, scholars in Southeast Asia will be able to read just about everything because it will be free. They probably will be able to publish nothing because they won't be able to pay, and the universities in the region won't be able to pay the fees. So this is not entirely a good thing. If we look at what's going on in Asia, there's a kind of two-tier publishing. So there are international journals. These are being published in most every country. A lot of them have their origins in departmental journals. So the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies started as a journal of the history department at the National University of Singapore. It's now published by Cambridge University Press, and it's in the indexes, but the editorial control is still with the Department of History at NUS. So these international journals are English language. They have both domestic and international readers. They're in the citation indexes. They publish international academic discussions, and they follow international writing conventions. Then there are national journals. And a lot of these originally were Asian language, although increasingly you're seeing them become bilingual or even English language. The topics they publish tend to be more local. And if your writing convention is more like what you see in Indonesian or Japanese or Chinese or whatever writing, then this journal will probably be able to accept that. The trouble is, very few of these journals are in the citation indexes. Now, I've mentioned them before, and I suspect a lot of you are familiar with them. There are two principal ones. There's the ones that are Clarivate Analytics. These are what used to be called the ISI indexes. The Science Citation Index, the Social Science Citation Index, the Arts and Humanities Citation Index. And it used to be that was all they had. And they were very selective, and a lot of journals were not in these indexes. And they then, in the past few years, set up a fourth index, which is called the Emerging Sources Citation Index. And a lot of the journals that you might be interested in publishing in appear in this index. The question is, what do universities think about the Emerging Sources Citation Index? I know in China, they don't accept it. So Chinese scholars are being asked to publish in English, and they're expected to get something in one of these three indexes. On the other hand, some countries are willing to accept this. And if you are at a university and want to find out, you better ask somebody if they're willing to accept the ESCI as being included in a citation index. Then there's Scopus. Scopus is actually traditionally better for the social sciences and humanities, because around a quarter of the articles indexed are from the social sciences. And Scopus became much more important in 2015 when the Times Higher Education and the Kwajalein-Simons University rankings began using Scopus in evaluating research. Now, what do the citation indexes do? They record when an article published in one journal is cited in another journal. They calculate journal impact factors. And these are very simple. They take the number of citations to articles in a journal, and they divide it by the number of articles that that journal publishes. So if every journal article gets cited once, then the impact factor is going to be 1. The problem for people in the social sciences and humanities is that impact in those fields tends to increase over time. And in the first 2 years, frequently the number of citations is fairly low. And if you were to do a 5-year impact factor, you would get a more realistic understanding of what the impact of a particular article is. But a lot of universities are saying, well, we want to see a quick response, and so they use a 2-year impact factor. Now, there's a lot of criticism of the impact factors. And one problem with them is that many articles in journals that have high impact factors are never cited by anybody. So some journals have a high impact factor because a few articles get cited a lot, and then other articles just don't get cited. Sometimes a single article will have so many citations that it distorts the result for a journal. One journal I know this happened, I think it was last year, and they said, wow, our impact factor has gone way up. But next year it's going to go way down. So this year it looks really good. Next year it's going to look really bad because they had one article that just was cited by lots and lots of people. Scholars are also playing games with the system. They game the system. Sometimes a group of people will agree to quote each other's work and build up their citations and greater impact. Some articles have multiple authors. Some of the science articles may have 15 or 20 authors, and it's a 2-page article. And sometimes people will cite articles. They're writing an article, they cite articles that they don't really use. And that again is trying to build up somebody else's impact factor. There are other ways that you can measure impact. There's an H index. Part of what this can do is measure the number of times a particular author's work is cited in other publications. There have been efforts to look at weighted citations. So if you get quoted or cited in a journal that has a lot of impact, then an important journal, then maybe it should count for more. Or sometimes people say, well, we could just do a count. How many times is an article viewed? How many times is it downloaded? And all this is being calculated somewhere. How many times is an article mentioned in social media? How many times is an article bookmarked? So would that give a better measure of the impact of an article? Well, there's a movement called altmetrics that is suggesting that. There are other citation indexes. Google Scholar runs a citation index of sorts. And there are citation indexes for Taiwan, for China, Korea, and ASEAN. So that's what I wanted to say about academic publishing. And I wanted to do this so I'd leave plenty of time since there are a lot of questions. So why don't we stop with that, take a quick break, and then start sorting out questions.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for the presentation. And let us take a short break, and then after that, we'll return for the Q&A session that we already have many of them over here. Yeah, some of them probably already answered it, but I mean,
well, we can go through them and see what we can do.
Yeah, we'll go through them, each one of them, and see. All right, let's have a break, and we'll return shortly.
Okay.
So Bella, you learning something new?
Lots and lots.
Yeah, it's great. You know, this is
Yeah.
professional development for everybody.
Everybody, really.
Yeah.
And I can see how, because everything's changing all the time as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are new trends, new considerations.
That's right. The latest thing I discovered is altmetric.
Yeah.
So when Paul mentioned, media attention, etc.,
Yeah.
now there are companies that are trying to gauge the media attention that articles get, and journals are beginning to subscribe to them. So it's very
How about
interesting.
Siddharth, how's about the open access in Michigan?
Open access.
Journals?
How is university? How your university respond for the open access?
I think that the problem, Pa Ismunandar, is, a lot of open access journals, I think Paul may have mentioned this briefly, they take quite a big fee in order to publish.
Yeah, yeah.
There is an inherent possibility, maybe it doesn't always happen, of a conflict of interest, right? Because it is in their interest to accept the paper, because when they accept the paper, they charge the fee.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't hooked up for a while, so I didn't hear the start of your question.
This is a question from Pa Ismunandar. What about open access journals and how are they viewed here? And I think over here, still the traditional journals are probably the most highly regarded, because I think people are a little bit uncomfortable with the idea that when your paper is accepted, you pay a big fee, because sometimes it can create an incentive for the journal to maybe accept a paper that another journal would not accept if it was not getting paid the fee.
When you say here, you're talking about the US, are you?
I'm talking about the US. I'm talking about how open access journals are viewed.
Yeah.
I think there are some that have a good reputation, but I think there are a lot that do not. So you have to ask your colleagues what are the good journals and get an idea also. That's another important source of information.
Well, one of the interesting things is that there's a huge amount of open access in Indonesia. A lot of journals that use open journal system, and they don't charge any fees.
Not most. We can say that all of them, or almost like all of them, is open.
Yeah, and
so Pa Ismunandar, if they don't charge a fee, then maybe the ones that are the most competitive, the most selective, right? That might be one criterion to look at. Paul, you mentioned the Journal of Asian Studies accepts fewer than 10% of its submissions, right?
Right.
That is an indicator, I think, of quality as well.
The problem for the Indonesian journals is that they don't charge. There are expenses, and I've asked various journal editors who pays the expenses, and generally the universities pick up that. But the problem is first of all, getting them read, and they seem to be read by people in Indonesia. I don't know how much outside. So that's one, but getting them into citation indexes and places like that would be a big boost.
Yeah, we at the moment is about 73 is indexed by Scopus, and most of them still publish. In the average, one journal publish about, if I remember correctly, it's about 74 articles a year, and that's the average. Some journalists only publish 14 articles a year, something like that.
Well, there are something like 8,000 journals in Indonesia. And around 40,000 in Asia. And most of these are not being picked up by the citation indexes at all.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of room for development there. But there's
it's
also
interesting you say that, Paul. And Pa Ismunandar, as you probably know, being in chemistry, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of variation across disciplines in terms of numbers of articles and frequency. So, for example, the American Journal of Public Health, I think they publish, or drug and alcohol dependence in the health sciences, They are top journals, but they publish an issue every month or every 2 months, and each issue contains 12 articles. So that's about 140. But then the Journal of Asian Studies publishes 4 issues a year, and there are probably 8, 9 articles in them, Paul.
It varies, but yeah, something along that about
So
number.
it really varies. I think one good indicator of quality. It's not perfect. There is no perfect indicator of quality, but one good indicator I think is selectivity.
Yeah.
So how many papers is the journal? How many submissions is it receiving, and what percentage is it publishing?
Yeah, well, that's fair enough. And the major journals, the major society journals, are highly selective. And no, the Journal of Asian Studies, when the association was small, then most people would think, okay, somewhere in the course of my career, I will put an article into the Journal of Asian Studies. Well, the association now has something like 7,000 to 8,000 members. Most of them will never have an article in the Journal of Asian Studies. Now, some associations, American Political Science Association actually has a whole number of journals. So they have their flagship journal. And then they have more specialized journals. And sometimes I think what they'll do, there's something called cascading journals. So you send a piece to the flagship journal. Well, it doesn't get accepted there, but they can then pass it on to one of the other journals. And so you kind of go down the steps until you finally arrive someplace you can be published.
Okay, I think we can start to answer some of the questions. Okay.
So were people listening into what we just said? Because some of that I think is probably useful.
Yes.
Okay.
I think they're listening. Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
Okay. All right. Hold on. Let me. Okay. First question. This is from Siti Daroja. She's from the Animal Husbandry Faculty of University of Pajajaran. She mentioned about we always have problem when writing our article to connect to our level of research because our equipment is still old and far from the advance of the research and far from novelties research. Could you please give us what can we do to make a good article with this kind of situation? Yeah.
Well, the good article has to have good research material, and presumably you can do research where you are. Your problem is going to be putting it into a context, entering a conversation with international journals. That's probably where open access becomes valuable, because if your university doesn't subscribe to a lot of expensive journals, you still may have access to open access journals. The problem for you is that a lot of the major journals, they will sell you an article individually, but they're going to charge you something like $30 or $40 per article. And I know that's really expensive. I've never paid it because I'm too cheap for that, but I suspect most academics are. So you do have a problem fitting it into the international context. I think the thing you want to be doing is what I was talking about in terms of doing a local topic and trying to understand what about your local topic would be interesting to people who are reading an international journal. So especially I think with something like animal husbandry, because the animals are going to be the same everywhere. So if you, I mean, what's going on with the animals? Okay, let's say you're in the tropics. So maybe diseases or something like that that are particular to the tropical areas. And then the tropics go all the way around the world. So you have a potential readership in other tropical areas in Africa, Latin America. So think about what it is that might be applicable somewhere else. I know a lot of people in Southeast Asia have this problem that the library doesn't have any resources and you're still being put under pressure to publish in these journals. And the best I can do for you, apart from what I just said, is talk to you about how you structure the article and how to position it so that an editor might pay attention. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the answer, Paul. And second question from Cindy Clara. Hi, Mr. Kratoska. I would like to ask about references on the manuscript. How if I cited the Predator's journal's reference unpurposedly? Would it become editor consideration? Thank you.
Well, the predatory journals are a problem. I think by and large, though, that the people that are going to be evaluating you aren't going to notice whether it's a predatory journal or not. So I don't think it's a huge problem. Publishing your piece in a predatory journal is more of a problem because, first of all, you'd have to pay, and second, nobody's going to pay much attention to it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Another question by Arini Utami. This probably already mentioned from your presentation, but I want to know if you want to comment on this. I wonder if Dr. Paul Kratoska can share some tips on how to make our manuscript unique and quote unquote be seen by the editors. Thank you, Arini from Gajah Mada.
Right. Well, the problem of being seen is what I was talking about in terms of an abstract. The editor will look at your paper, and now if you've sent it to the right kind of journal, the editor is going to pay a lot of attention to the title, the abstract, the opening paragraph, the closing paragraph. And so that's where you want to call attention to what you have done. And what the editor is looking for is something new, something that his readers or her readers will want to see. So you need to be talking about what you have accomplished in your research. And if you're, how do you make your manuscript unique? I guess basically everybody's piece of research is unique, but some of them don't actually come up, they don't find very much. And so what you really have to have is some information based on your research that adds to what is already known. Now, you do need to understand what is already known, and you discover that by reading a lot in the literature.
Okay, thank you. This following question is from the YouTube comments, YouTube chat. It's from AIFIS-RISTEK from Universitas Islam Negeri Sultan Syarif Qasim Riau. Please give more explanation what you stated before about the subjective explanation. Isn't that important for a writer to express what are they thinking about some issues?
Well, that's an interesting question. If what you were thinking is based on your research, then it may be. But the criticism that's made is that sometimes people give their opinion without much foundation for it. And the opinion needs to be well grounded. If you give an opinion based on facts that you've discovered, then fine. That's an argument.
Okay. All right. Another next question from Professor Pujiati. And she would like to know what are the factors for an article to be rejected in a Scopus published journal? Is there a differences between Scopus or just another journal?
No, a lot of the journals in Scopus are also in the other citation indexes, the Clarivate Analytics. And I don't think there's any difference in terms of the journal's procedures. What will get a journal article rejected in one journal is probably similar to what gets it rejected somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Except for the fact that it depends if you send it to the right journal. I mean, if you send it to the wrong journal or to a journal that doesn't really handle the kind of thing you've done, of course, that will lead to rejection. So it's if you've matched your research with a journal, and the journal rejects you, then that probably means they thought your research wasn't good enough.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Paul. And the next one is from Zefira Hianadi. But the question is, I'm wondering if you have special tips to elaborate on our journal in such a well-organized way. What criteria can be seen as international accepted journal? I think you may have addressed this during your presentation about all the criteria, no? Or would you like to comment, Paul?
Nothing more than what I said before, I think.
Okay. Okay. So let's move to the next question. Ahmad Solihin. Professor Paul, and thank you for AIFIS committee. Could you tell us how significant novelties during editorial and reviewing processes within manuscript decision?
Sorry, say that one more time.
Could you tell how significant novelties during editorial and reviewing processes within manuscript decision?
Well, if it doesn't say something new, then the chances are pretty good it will be rejected. I don't know quite what to make of the word novelty, but I guess if you're thinking about that in terms of something new, something different, then you would expect that would be a necessary thing. But you can do something that is a novelty, but doesn't really add very much to what's already known. I mean, just take a very simple example. Let's say that somebody's done a study and they found something about 50 villages. Okay, so the same pattern happens in all 50 villages. So you come along and you add one more village, and maybe the other villages are all rice farming, but this one is a mixture of rice farming plus sugarcane or something like that. So yours is a little bit different, but you have the same answer. Same thing happens there. So you have a little novelty there, but you haven't added anything significant.
Okay. All right, thank you. The next question, I think similar about what you just answered, Paul. Strength and highlight novelty of the article. And then the next one, Irma Fitriani. How to choose suitable journal publisher based on our research. I think you also covered that in your presentation, I believe. And Rana Farasati. Okay. I'm Rana, junior soil scientist at IOPRI. Most of the times, the obstacles in publishing international journal is that we're not that confident with our manuscript in English. And instead, we publish it in the national level journal. Is there any suggestion to convince that our manuscript is good enough for international journal? And is there any specific criteria to be accepted?
Well, language is, of course, a problem. It's a problem for anybody who's not a native speaker, but it's also a problem for a lot of native speakers. A lot of people who are native speakers of English do not write very well at all. So it's a problem that needs to be dealt with, and there are various possible ways, but no surefire solution. A lot of people, if they have a friend who's a native speaker, they have that person read it. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, because the friend may not have much time. The friend may not be a very good editor. I think if you're working on your own, the simplest writing is the best. I mean, you work out, these are the points I want to make, and you write them down. And then you try to put a story around those points. And then if there's somebody available who's a professional editor, you can try that. That all costs money. But usually if you are not trying to be fancy with your writing, you just don't worry about that. Just write plain, simple English. You may have a reasonable chance of getting an editor to look at it. And if the writing is not too complicated, the editor may say, okay, I can fix that. It's a little bit easier in the sciences because the articles are shorter. And the critical part of the sciences is generally the discovery, whatever, if there's an experiment or if there is some new factual information that you're introducing, it doesn't depend so much on the quality of the writing as it does on the quality of the information.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Paul. This is a question from the YouTube chat from Meta Damayanti, Universitas Pajajaran. She wrote it in Indonesian. I have submitted the article to an international journal, and the editor said that it's under the review process. But now it's already entering the second year, and they said that they're still looking for one more peer reviewer. What should I do?
Oh boy, that's too long. It really, they shouldn't be taking that long. On the other hand, if they do get it peer reviewed and it gets published, then that'll be good for you. So you don't want to shut it down if there's any chance it will be published. But 2 years is really too long. So I think you really have to make a decision. And I would write to them again, point out to them nicely that this has taken a very long time, that you need to do something with the article. And if they're not going to take it, you need to send it somewhere else. So could they please either finish the peer review or decide that they don't want it, so you can get along with life, because this is, no, it shouldn't happen that way.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, okay, let's just be a bit clearer about the time frame, because if an article comes in, it would be reasonable to take up to 3 months to get the peer review. And if it is not finished in 3 months, then the editor ought to write to you and say, okay, we're still interested in this, but we have problems getting somebody. And so if the editor is keeping you informed, then that's all right. But it shouldn't go, I wouldn't think that the process should take, it shouldn't take a year. It certainly shouldn't take 2 years.
Okay. All right. Next question from Mukzarufda. I'm not sure what the person is asking. He wrote, well, I want one question about, what about independent researcher? My assumption is he wants to ask is, if he's an independent researcher, can he still submit a manuscript? I think that's what he's trying to
well,
ask.
the biggest problem for an independent researcher is that you probably don't have access to the resources of a library. And that makes it very hard for you to read the relevant articles and discover what other people have said about your topic. No journal editor is going to reject you, reject you just because you're an independent researcher. But a journal editor, sorry, just a minute. The journal editors don't want to lose good articles. And a good article depends partly on the qualifications of the person writing it. Now, the qualification doesn't mean that you've got a PhD, but it does mean that there's some basis for saying that this is worth reading. Now, as I said earlier, this basis can be that you've done a dissertation on that topic. It can be that you've done a research project on that topic. Sometimes special access could be useful. So let's say that you've interviewed somebody important, and the reason you were able to do that is that the family is a personal friend. And so you were able to get some candid remarks from that person that other people wouldn't have. I mean, there are all sorts of sort of special considerations that might help. But fundamentally, nobody wants to publish an article that's unreliable. And so you need to persuade the editor that your article is reliable. And like I said, there are several things you can do that will be persuasive. But you have to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about, that you understand what the literature says about it. And for independent researchers, that's the challenge.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Paul. Next question is from Ahmad Nurul Huda, you from UIN, Raden Intan Lampung. Pak Paul, you said writing begins with answers. Could you please elaborate a bit further what you mean by saying that?
Well, because answers follow questions. And so what I was saying is that your research has to be about answering questions. And the best questions usually are something that explains why or how something happened. So you take your research, you look at the facts that you found, and you can pretty much ask any fact that you have, you can start asking, well, why did that happen? How did it happen? And some of those facts will not take you anywhere, but some of them will take you into something interesting. But when you write, you are basically writing about the answer to your question. So like I said about the election, the question is, why did the People's Action Party win the election? Well, you can have discussion about that. People will disagree as to what the factors were. But you as a researcher, you make your mind up. These are the factors that I think were the reasons. Okay? Then you say that. This is my article. The reasons that the PAP won that election are 1, 2, 3, whatever they are. So that's an answer. And your question was, why did the PAP win? But you don't necessarily say that in the article. You just you build the article around the answer.
Okay. Thank you. Next question from Saiful Umam. How is about taking a chapter of dissertation and submit it as a journal article? Is it possible to be published that in a peer-reviewed journal?
Well, yes. There's a difference between a chapter, of course, and an article, because a dissertation, you probably have some background information in the first chapter. And your fourth chapter, if that's what you're trying to publish, you haven't repeated that background information. So you have to turn the chapter into an article. And that means the article will be about whatever research production, research output you have in that chapter. But you have to explain it. So you give the background, you explain where it fits into what other people have done. But let's look at this slightly differently. The question people often ask is, should my dissertation be turned into a book? And generally speaking, the answer is no. Most dissertations should not be turned into books. But a lot of dissertations have good material for articles. And one more thing about this, in this day and age, a lot of universities will give more credit for an article in a good journal than they will for a book. I've talked to people who say, well, my university, if I publish 2 articles in top-ranked journals, that's worth a book. Well, the amount of effort that goes into a book is much more than goes into 2 articles. But the universities will value the articles because they can see the impact factor. They get the prestige of the journal. So frequently the best approach is not to turn it into a book, but to publish articles based on some of the chapters. One more thing, when people write a dissertation, generally they don't use all the material they have. And it's often the case that you can look at some of the material that you didn't put in the dissertation and turn that into an article, or you combine it with things that are in one of your chapters when you make your article. So you're not bound by what you actually put in the dissertation.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Next question from Octavia Lestari from Universitas Gunadarma. This is from YouTube chat. The payment for international reputable publication almost cost me $2,000 For language service also expensive while the budget is limited. How to solve this?
Wait a minute, the $2,000 was paid for what though? For the
international reputable publication, and for almost $2,000. And then for language service also expensive.
Okay, so 2,000 plus the payment for the language service.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But he was published.
I'm not sure. You just mentioned about that.
Okay, there are people who would say that if you pay the $2,000 and get published, it might be worth it. But it does seem like a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it depends, of course, if you paid it yourself. If you could persuade your university to pay it, then fine, go ahead. But it's a lot of scholars, when I started, disapproved of paying any money, because in those days, if you paid money to get published, you were probably doing it because you couldn't get published any other way. Mm-hmm. Okay, what's happened now is that a lot of publishers, book publishers and journal publishers, are not making enough money to keep the journals and the books alive. And so they've got to find some source of income. And so even if the publication is a subscription journal, not open access, just subscription journals, some publishers still ask for money. The sciences especially, this has become a standard thing that people pay the journal, but the reputable journals usually pay for publication. They don't ask for money for submission. And so if a journal is asking, if you want to submit something, you have to pay, then that usually means it's not a very good journal. As to how to make it cheaper, I don't have an answer. But that again goes back to what we were saying about the journals in Indonesia, because if some of them could be, if the standard could be probably elevated a bit, but if the same publishing model was kept, where the contributors don't have to pay a processing charge, it seems to me that some of those journals should be more successful.
May I add something, Paul?
Oh, by all means.
I think, again, there are variations across disciplines in terms of fees being paid to journals. So for economics journals, the best ones actually require that you pay a fee when you submit the paper. And that fee often goes to the reviewers, a part of it, as some kind of honorarium. So I think it's also important to check the discipline and to check the traditions within the conventions within the discipline.
Yeah, but of course it's risky, because if you pay the fee and then you're rejected, then you've lost the money. So
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. You're paying for the service of the review. I think that's the logic.
Well, economics is reviewers are very fortunate because they're getting paid, because most reviewers are not.
Yeah, most people don't. Okay. Next question from Suraya Afif. How to imagine your potential readers for our paper? Is it different about this issue if we are going to write a book instead of a paper? Suraya Afif from Universitas Indonesia.
Who is an old friend of mine, I think. But so the question again is, say the question again.
How to imagine your potential readers for our paper? Is it different about this issue if we are going to write a book instead of a paper?
You start imagining yourself. What would I mean, you're in a certain field. What would you be interested in? And if you, I know this is a challenging thing to do, and I said it, that you need to try and picture your audience. But if you know your field, you probably have some idea from looking at articles in journals and so on, what kind of things people are interested in. So that's really the kind of place you start. I don't think it's really much different for a book.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, one of the questions earlier, was that from Ibu Efi? Maybe it was. If it is, I should say hello to both Suraya and Ibu Efi, but go ahead.
Okay. This is from YouTube, I think. I'm Ginanjar from Universitas Islam Indonesia. Mr. Paul Kratoska, is it true that citing one or two articles already published by the journal to which we intend to submit our draft will increase the chance to be accepted by the editor?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
What is significant there is that if you are using articles from a journal, that means it's probably a good place to try, because it means they're interested in your topic. So from that point of view, it's something to pay attention to. But no, I don't think the journal's going to be, it's not going to affect their decision if you've cited articles from that journal.
Okay. Okay. From Eka Putra, Indiana University, if we are not using policy suggestion or practical application in the conclusion and recommendation of our article, would it be sufficient to international journals if we are proposing the conclusion to raising the awareness of the issue?
Not exactly. I mean, I think what you need to do is think in terms of what you are contributing to the discussion, contributing to the literature. And raising awareness, because most articles are written about something that people are already aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard to find a topic that absolutely nobody is aware of.
Okay. Right. This is from Rana Farasati again. In choosing journal references of literature, is it better if we choose less journals but cite frequently from it, or use more journals but cite only few sentences or research findings from each of it?
Well, be careful about citing, when you're talking about citing sentences. Often what you want to do is not cite this, well, I know what you mean by citing, but you put the sentence in your own words. I don't think it makes much difference whether you're citing a broad range of journals, a lot of different journals, or just a few. The point is more that you want to cite things that actually help your argument. I mean, stick with that your article is about your argument, your discussion of that argument. And so if something from another journal helps with that, fine, use it. But don't go out looking for a lot of different journals just for the sake of having a big number of journals cited.
Okay.
Siddharth.
May I add something? I think one of the things, one of the roles that citing other articles plays is it helps you to contextualize your own research within the larger literature. And that I think is very important because when you're trying to convince the editor and the reviewers that you are contributing to a literature, you need to talk about what has been done and what has not been done in that literature. So that's the first point. And then the second is, again, there is a lot of variation across disciplines in terms of citations. So if you write an article for a health journal, sometimes they will give you a limit. They will say, we don't want more than 30 references. You have to limit it to 30. So I think it's also very important to look at the journal that you have in mind, look at some of the papers, the published articles in that journal, and see how many papers they tend to cite. Do they cite 10, 15, 20, 30, or 70 or 80? And make sure that you are speaking the language of that journal when you submit to that journal.
Yeah,
and that includes the number of citations.
Yeah, fair enough. What I was trying to say is that you don't want to go looking for more and more citations just for the sake of building up a number. Whatever you put in needs to be relevant.
Okay.
And also you don't need to oversight a particular point. I mean, sometimes I've had people, and so they make a point and they give me sometimes it's a quotation, and they give me 4 different journals. They don't tell me which article it came from. They've just thrown in a lot of different people. Maybe they all talked about that, but there's no real benefit in giving a lot of sources for the same point.
I just jump a little bit, Paul.
Yeah, sure.
I think imply in the question is we need to be careful about what you mentioned about paraphrasing. You have to paraphrase the sentence that you cite, not just like copy. Sometimes in many of our not professional researchers, I think the student is that is this okay? Just like 100% copy of your sentence, as long as you put a reference there. Is sometimes this is not acceptable because this is like plagiarism.
Yeah, well, it's of course it's okay if you put the quotation marks, but editors are a bit reluctant to have too many quotations, and it's a very strange thing we do to students because they're reading things written by professionals who have worked really hard on their sentences.
Yeah.
And now we're turning around and saying, well, that's a very good sentence, but you can't use it. You've got to put it in your own words, which won't be nearly as good.
Yeah.
But it's part of the training.
Yeah. Thank you.
May I mention something, Paul?
Of course.
So I'll give you one experience I had recently. A journal approached me to review a paper, and it was a paper from Southeast Asia. I won't tell you where. And one of the first things I did is we actually have software here called Authenticate. And this is a piece of software that will take anything that you upload and it will check it among millions and millions of other documents for similarities in text. And I found 6 or 7 instances in which there was material that had been either completely taken or heavily taken from other locations and not appropriately cited.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, it made, well, fortunately in some sense, in terms of my time, I just mentioned all of these things. I said, here are some examples. And I wrote back to the editor saying, what do you want me to do? And I haven't heard back from the editor. So,
yeah,
so be very, very careful. This is a very, very big issue and people are aware of it and they have software and they will check. If the journal does not check, a reviewer may check.
Yeah, well, I'm working on something myself right now, and there was one section. So I had several different paragraphs that I was going to work on to put in there. And so I just copied them and I stuck them in there, not to use them, but with the idea that I was going to go back and then I would think about that and I would write my own version. And then I thought, this is really dangerous because if I forget to do that, then I've left that paragraph in there and I have plagiarized. So you have to be really careful. I mean, it's so easy just to cut and paste, and you have to be really careful about doing that.
I don't know, Pa Ismunandar, whether Indonesian scholars have access to anti-plagiarism software, but now I've made it, Paul, to follow on your point for the same reason that you said. I actually put my own papers before I submit them to a journal. I run them to plagiarism software just to be 100% sure, automatically.
More and more university, some university are subscribed for the software. Yeah,
Great.
Because that's also depend on your subscription for the full text of the journal. You have that software, but you don't have the subscription for the full text, then it's not running well. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Now it's almost 10 p.m. and we still have a lot of grounds to cover. I don't think we will be able to answer everything.
Well, we can go a while longer. Depends on you.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah. But what about you, Paul? How long can you go longer? I mean,
well,
you'll be the one who's answering the questions.
No, I'm fine. It's 11 o'clock in Singapore, but
Okay.
I'm not tired, so we can keep going.
Okay, so probably another 10 minutes, yeah, because I think some of the participants also have, probably
Okay.
some other activities.
Sure.
All right, this one question from Norberto Seribu Santoso from Atmajaya, Yogyakarta. This is related with what we just discussed earlier. To what extent is a self-citation, quote unquote, ethically allowed?
A soft citation.
Self-citation.
Self-citation. Oh, self-citation. Well, if you look at the citation indexes for the journals, they give you the number of citations and they give you the number of self-citations, and fundamentally they're subtracting that. So it's a problem because if you've written an article on a topic and now you're writing a second article that is different, but it builds on what you did before, you should cite it, but just don't expect to get a lot of credit for it.
Okay. All right. Next question from Kurniati Dewi from LIPI. Dear Dr. Paul Kratoska, can you give us some explanation about the review article? What is the criteria of a very good review article that can be published in International Referee Journal? What are the important points that should be available in a good review article? Because a review article does not need the empirical research and merely scientific review about certain body of knowledge. I'm still don't understand about the standard to write a good review article and how to increase the chance to be published as good as empirical article. Can you give some explanation?
I wouldn't write a review article unless you've talked to a journal first, because the review articles generally are going to appear as part of the book review section. And the review editor, in most cases, will not accept an unsolicited article. So the first step, I think, is that you decide which books you're interested in putting together for the review article. You contact a journal and you say, would you be interested in an article on this topic using these books? And then if you get a positive response, the next thing is that you're trying to compare these, but you don't compare them by saying, okay, here's this book, it says this, this, this. Here's this book, it says this, this, this. You say, okay, the first book talks about point A. The second book also talks about point A. The third book also talks about point A. Now let's see what's the same and different about point A in those three books. And you go along that way. So you're concentrating on the content of the book and not just a sort of broad comparison, but looking at significant elements in the book. Now, the second thing, and this is sort of the thing I was saying about the publications generally, is that you need to understand what the readers might be interested in. And so the points you're picking need to be points that will be significant for other people. If I can give you an example, I don't know if I can come up on the top of my head, but well, okay, there's this whole concept of Zomia, and the societies of the hills, and there are different views about that. People have tried looking at it in different places. So there's the Zomia of the hills. Somebody's worked on a project of Zomia of the sea. And somebody else that I know is working on a project of Zomia in the Pasisir. So if you had three books on those topics, then first thing you would look at is saying, okay, are they using Zomia in the same way? And then do they draw the same conclusions, or does it turn out that it starts the same, but it goes off in different directions? So something like that would probably work. But you need to have a reason for comparing the article or the books that you're using for the review article. But again, the first thing is to get somebody interested in the piece. So I've said you don't normally send an inquiry to a journal editor about an article. I think it is important to do that with a review article.
Okay, right. Thank you, Paul. This is comments and also question from Professor Pujiati, MSOS PhD from University of North Sumatra. The problem of university press in Indonesia are not available in digital publication. It is difficult to get an ebook and a journal from our university library. What do you think? What do you think about this, Mr. Paul Kratoska? Because lately, the trend now, every student do not want to go to the library, especially in the pandemic era of COVID-19.
Well, people stopped going to the library before this COVID-19 started because so much material is now online. So it's more a question of the digital publishing and digital publications than it is the physical problem of going to the library. So if people have online access, the problem then becomes, what does the library offer them? Because a lot of digital books are only available through a library, and some libraries don't actually have that much in their collection. I don't know if there's any real easy solution for that. Again, it comes back to open access. And I think this is going to change because open access started off about articles, but you're starting to get movement toward open access books. There's a program, I don't know what you call it, it's not a business, but a nonprofit called Knowledge Unlatched. And what they do is they try to get libraries to pay toward the publication of a book. And if they get a certain number of libraries to agree, then the book will be open access. And the idea, I'm telling you this not because there's so many books in this program, but more that people are trying to find ways to make books available as open access publications. And the problem, as always, is who's going to pay the costs. So right now it's a problem for you if you don't have a library that has a pretty good collection. And I don't have any solution for it, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's great. All right, next question is from, my name is Amban Ibnu Rusyud Masud. I come from Hasanuddin University in the forestry faculty. In several international journals, I found there's a part of theoretical framework. Is it the same with literature review, or there are another explanation?
The theoretical framework is different. And if you're using some theoretical approach, then you need to establish that. There's a difference here between a dissertation and an article or book, though, because in a dissertation, you may well be expected to demonstrate that you're familiar with a body of theory. You don't do that in your article. What you do instead is, if you're using a certain theoretical approach, or you're referring to theorists, and you do need to talk about that. And also explain what use you're making of it. Are you using this to help interpret your data? Are you disagreeing with the theory? Something like that. But it's not the same as the literature review.
Okay. All right. Next question is from Zira Rastesa from Universitas 11 Maret, Surakarta. Do you think it is necessary for us to divide the parts of our article into 1, introduction, 2, literature review, 3, discussion, and 4, conclusion? Or is it okay to write without such a division, and just the first paragraph is the introduction, and we go on to the literature review and discussion? The last paragraph of our article will be conclusion. Is it okay to write that way for an international journal?
I wouldn't think it is. Let's understand how people read articles. Because you write the article starting at the beginning, and then, okay, you have the introduction, all these parts until you come to the conclusion. People are not necessarily going to read it that way. So if I pick up an article, my first question is, do I want to read it at all? And I look at the title, I look at the abstract. My second question is, do I want to read all of it? And sometimes there'll be some section in it that's really useful for me, but maybe not the whole thing. Well, how do I find that section? And what I want is to be able to go through and see headings that are telling me, okay, this section is about this, and the next section is about that. That helps me decide if I want to read it and how much of it I want to read. So it's good practice to have these headings and these subheadings.
Okay. All right. Now it's almost 10:10, so I think this would be the last question. But don't worry, we'll compile everything and we'll answer it later. Okay, final questions from Marini Utami. Is it true that editors check to see or take into consideration that the reference list articles from his or her journal? I understand this isn't written in the guideline for others, but I kept getting this advice. I also understand the reasoning, but would be glad to hear your view or experience on this. Thank you.
This is the same as the question we had before, isn't it? About does it help you to cite articles from that same journal?
Similar. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you already answered that.
Yeah. Let's try one more.
Okay. Let's try one more. Hold on. Okay. From UPSGA. I'm Ina Hunga from UKSW Salatiga. Thank you, Professor Paul. Could you please share any tips on how to select journals for acceptance opportunities? Is it a specific field of science or geographic area, ASEAN, China, etc., specific topics, gender, disability, etc.?
Well, this goes back to what I said about the Web of Science and the SCImago, because you can sort out journals that way.
Okay, Tanjung Pura. Okay, let's try another one. Hani Barata from Universitas Tanjung Pura. How do I manage to publish research findings into more than one articles without being considered as a salami publication? I'm from social science. Thanks.
Well, if you know about salami publications, then that's good, because it means you know to watch out for that. There's no rule I can give you here, but it's just that you want to ask a substantial question and answer that question. The salami publications, and if everyone isn't familiar with this, salami can be cut into very, very thin slices. And so a salami publication is where somebody has a body of information or research material, and they just give you a tiny little bit, make it into an article, and they give you a tiny little bit, make it into an article. And editors don't like this. There's not enough substance. So usually I'd have to say that if you're doing an article that's very, very thin, the question you're answering probably is not very interesting or not very good. So it really goes back to the question. If you ask a substantial question, you're going to have to write a substantial article.
All right. Okay, I think this should be the last one from Hendrik. Currently, multidisciplinary research areas are encouraged. My question is, how does one combine several areas of research, for instance, environment science, economy, and engineering science into one, and look at the unknowns that can be addressed by a multidisciplinary research?
Yeah, okay. Being multidisciplinary, everybody thinks this is a good thing, and I think it's a good thing. But the boundaries between disciplines are not entirely clear. I mean, you pick up a book, and on the back it may say this is a book in such and such discipline. But the likelihood is that there's material in that book that comes from other disciplines anyway. So to me, it's kind of a non-problem. You're dealing with a topic. I mean, let's talk about forestry, something to do with the diseases in forestry, something like that. And so that's what you want to look for. You're not looking for it by discipline. You're looking for it wherever that information can be found. So if it turns out you have people who have looked at this issue from different points of view, maybe you have a topic, a sociologist has looked at it, a scientist has looked at it. Okay, that's multidisciplinary. But you're going to take out of those studies what's useful for the piece that you're writing. Maybe say one more thing about this, about being multidisciplinary. I've worked a fair amount with people at Kyoto, and Kyoto University does a lot of multidisciplinary work. Center for Southeast Asian Studies, for example, and they'll take a topic and they'll have a scientist, they'll have a sociologist, an anthropologist, various other people, a historian, all of them working on this topic. They get some really exciting results. But as a publisher, these books are very hard because, we did one, which I'll advertise a little bit. If you're interested in peat and the use of peat in Kalimantan, This was on that. It was about plantations that are being put into peat areas. And it was a multidisciplinary book. I had a terrible time finding referees because every referee I approached said, well, I could do this, but I can't do the other things. So these are valuable books because of the different perspectives that are in them. But they're also very challenging.
Okay. Thank you, Paul, for answering all the questions. We still have some other questions, but I think because this is already 10:15 and it's already late, and many of the participants already left the rooms, but from the Zoom webinar. Thank you for everyone for participating.
Well, thank you to everybody for attending.
Yeah, it's been a great session. And for the participants, do not forget to follow or like our Instagram account on AIFIS Official, and also like our Facebook fan page on Facebook. Just search AIFIS and then the information and the answers from the questions that we have today will be sorted and will be posted also on those platforms. Thank you again, and have a good night, everyone.
Yeah, and thank you. And just quickly for tomorrow's session, saya ingin mengingatkan, I'd like to remind everyone bahwa sesi kita akan dimulai jam 7 malam untuk hari kedua, dan fasilitator buat besok adalah Profesor Siddharth Chandra dengan topik dengan topiknya adalah what reviewers look for, responding to referees reports, dan choosing the right journal. Dan Dr. Paul Kratoska juga akan bergabung pada sesi Q&A. Dan untuk yang mendaftar, link untuk bergabung ke meeting besok akan dikirimkan kembali lewat email, dan sesi tersebut juga akan di-live streamkan lewat YouTube. Terima kasih kembali. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Bye
Thank you,
all.
Selamat malam. Thank you.
Selamat malam.
Thank you,
Selamat
Paul.
malam, selamat tidur.
Sampai besok ya.
Bagi orang
Okay.
di Amerika
See you again,
Syarikat,
guys,
selamat
tomorrow.
pilihan raya.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Good luck
Thank
with the
you.
election. Hopefully everything will go well. We'll see.
We hope so too.
It's going to
Thank
be a
you.
long process.
Long process.
We
It will
won't
be
know, I
exciting
think.
to be, yeah, tomorrow. We'll
Okay.
see what's going to happen.
Ya,
Okay.
terima
Let's just
kasih.
wait for the participant to leave before we end it, no?
Yeah.
Yes.
To make sure
Yes.
they're leaving.
And also, Anas, I think kita bisa stop rekamannya, Anas.
Oh yeah.
Oh ya,
I think
sudah.
he stopped already.
Sudah di
Yeah.
stop ya di YouTube,
Sudah.
sudah nggak di live stream
Neta?
lagi ya. Ya, Siddharth.
Neta,